Tiohtià:ke Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke/Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So I will pass out the roll call sheet in a moment. But we do have someone on Skype call who's presenting as they had an emergency and couldn't make it to present for the Students for Consent Culture. So we'll try to speed things up to get through that point as well. So if there's any modifications to the agenda, additions, removals, anything like that, John.
Yes, I'd like the Muslim Students Association presentation removed from presentations to new business substantive. Because I don't want to be here to present tonight, so I was kind of thinking myself. And as the second item, I'd like to move the woodnote thing up to presentations because there is an external presenter.
Oh, okay. Yes, James.
Yes, I would like to pull all sustainability documents from the consent agenda.
Okay. Yes, Kevin.
I would like to remove annual campaign from the agenda, please.
Okay. I think there was one more thing that had to be removed that I was told. Maybe not. Yes, Sophie.
I'd like to move positions book in new business substantive after the window presentation.
Okay. And someone had messaged me that there was a resignation on a committee and wanted it put on the agenda as well. Yeah, Sam?
Open education resources.
Okay, I can put that under appointments. Is there anything else? Yes, Jane.
It's also to move Indigenous Corporations and the Elections Reform Committee to after the Woodhouse note.
Sorry, didn't hear that.
After the Woodhouse note presentation. Just wishing I have like really rare anytime soon. And
Is everyone okay with dealing with those first, as the counselor has to leave?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any other modifications to the agenda? Yes, James?
I would like the CTK and bonuses to be moved up right after Students for Consent Culture.
Oops, sorry, that was the one I had to remove. UTV pay is
Oh, okay. All right. Also, I would like to move all the closed session files up right after Students for Consent Culture and add Indigenous reparations to closed session.
Okay. The person presenting Indigenous reparations motion, that's not closed, is it?
no, is there a reason why you want to close?
I do not trust certain people here.
Okay, well, it's the mover of the, it's the person who brought the motion who decides if they want to read it open or closed, so.
Yeah, it's an open point.
Yeah, if there's something that needs to be moved into closed, like if the discussion, we can move it into closed, but for the moment it'll stay open. Is there, yes, Danielle?
I'd like to move the positions book to above the C, Indigenous reparations.
Oh, I thought we were okay with doing that first since the counselor has to go. Is that okay?
Okay, sure. So
Okay.
above D.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to read out the agenda, and then just because I don't want us arguing about this later, like if everyone is okay with that, we'll be good. Okay, is there any other modification? I know everyone wants the agenda points first, but we need to be patient. Okay, so in new business substantive, I have CNES complaint closed, then bonuses also closed. That way we get those done in closed session. Indigenous reparations, electoral reform, positions book, MSA, survey policy, council-elect, external member, Silk Fund committee application, finance and operations, and as it was before. Yes, Kevin?
I would advocate to put closed session at the end. Like, we have presenters, and also not everybody has to be here for closed session.
The presenters are going to go first. So
No,
this
yeah,
is just under
but
substantive.
just also, executive will have to step out also during some part of the closed session. So like, if it can be at the end, that would be good.
Is everyone, let me try to negotiate this, is everyone okay if we do Indigenous reparations, electoral reform because a counselor has to leave, positions book, and then closed? you have an objection?
Yeah, no, so I think that it would be much better to do the closed session stuff first, because it's best to have all counselors' input on that, because it's dealing with very sensitive financial matters.
Okay,
Can we vote
so I'll just quickly, yeah, I'm just gonna do a vote because, or else the agenda's never gonna get accepted and we need to finish this one day. So all in favor of putting the closed session documents first, please raise your placards. 4, all opposed? 3, 4, 5, 6, and any abstentions? 1, 2. Okay, so in that case it fails, so the closed session documents, they're near the top, sorry, closed session points, they're near the point, near the top, just not the first things. So we will get them done, just a tiny bit of patience for the first 2. Anything else to add, modify, remove, subtract? Okay, so in that case, I just need a motion to approve the agenda and all items under consent. Rory? Okay, do we have a second? Jaren? All right, all those in favor of approving? 7, 8, sorry, hand. All those opposed? 1, and any abstentions. Okay, so that carries. If you'll give me 2.5 seconds to reorder all of these letters in the order of the alphabet. Okay, so I'll upload this in the Facebook group in 2 seconds. But first, like I said, since we have somebody who is on Skype, who's giving the presentation for students for consent culture, John. I will give them the floor.
Okay, so we don't have IT in.
No, we don't, because it's not our book.
Okay. So, Connor, can you hear me there?
I know.
Okay, so you'll be on a laptop in front of the whole council. We had to change room at the last minute, so we don't have the audio visual hooked up. So just try to project, and hopefully people can hear you. So just say something and hope people can hear you. We'll check.
Hello.
Everybody
This
hears
is
that?
testing.
waving, come
1,
on.
2, 3.
Yeah, it works.
Is everyone okay? That's actually pretty loud. All right, perfect.
And you have the floor.
Hi, folks. This is actually such a nice room. Wow. Who would have thought? Okay, so I have a feeling what's going to happen is that you can hear me, but it's going to be very hard for me to hear you. So I might ask Caitlin or John, whoever's near the laptop, if you don't mind just like interrupting me if someone has a question at some point.
Yeah, all good.
Great. So, hello folks. Apologies for the last minute turnaround in terms of not having a human be able to be in the space with you folks. I'm actually in Halifax right now. And so hello from Halifax, and the walker says hi. So hopefully you folks had a chance to kind of look through either the Legislative report and or the like shortened 2-pager together for CSU Council specifically on kind of what is the work that we've been doing. We spoke a few months ago, as many of you hopefully remember, so I figure I won't necessarily do a full debrief on what Student Consent Culture Canada is. That being said, if someone has any questions, let me know. Instead, I figure I'll just like focus on what is the work that we have done and where are we going. So this basically is a chance, really more than anything, for us to just say thank you. More than like first and foremost, thank you to CSU Council for being basically the organization that gave us the ability to keep going, especially after the setback we had last end of summer with the changeover and all of the legal implications for everything that kind of happened. Because we were able to fund some of the labor. For example, I was able to work basically full-time, semi-paid, semi-unpaid, to make sure that this organization continued. and was able to achieve what it wanted to. And I'm actually really proud of the work the fact that we survived, and not only did we survive, but we actually grew how many student groups we were working with, continued to work with all the groups that we were working with before. Our team grew, and our projects and our expertise and our energy grew. And more than anything, we're just so excited to kind of jumpstart our next projects. So all that being said, I'm going to run down kind of what it was specifically that we were able to accomplish this year while setting up basically an entire new organization and where we want to go next. So hopefully, like in the 2-page report, there's a link to budgets, so I can answer any question about budgets that you folks may have. As you probably saw, there are 2 different ones. So there's one that's January to June, and there's one that's June to June of next year. So there's like our upcoming budget, and then like a half-year budget that was basically since January was when we actually got our feet under us in order to like hit the ground running. And so that was our budget for that. I also do have the budget from October to January that shows all of our expenses from then. We spent about $2,500 on things like legal fees, corporation fees, but I have all that information that I can show you folks as well. I don't know if you're able to see the laptop, but if you are, you'll be able to see it. Otherwise, I'll send the link that you folks can look through as well. So, all that being said, basically since January, what we've been working on, as you folks know, we operate under 3 main pillars, so outreach, advocacy, and education. So the first one, education, we've been working on adapting the our-turn training, specifically based on feedback that we received from participants at Carleton University, with the hope that we could then roll it out to students on other campuses across Canada. This is particularly one of the initiatives we're doing to work with rural campuses, specifically who don't have access to like student-run support centers or even like well-run community centers that deal with sexual violence or ideas of consent or gender and all those things. And so that's one of the things that we've been working on, and we're hoping to roll that out in the fall. The other one, which you folks have probably heard a decent amount about, is the research on predatory classics that we're doing. So we're actually just about to submit our ethics for it. We're not submitting it to a university. We're doing a community-based research ethics that exists because we're purposefully trying to keep that research A, rigorous, and B, away from any university because we don't want any university to feel like they have control over what can and cannot be said in that report. And we're also working with the Justice for Women Collective in Manitoba on specifically, they have a resource for survivors on like kind of community resources, self-care techniques, and things like that. And we're working on nationalizing that project. So those were the 3 main things we worked on in education since January. In outreach, we've continued working on grading everyone's policies, working with the 45 different groups across Canada that we work with. We're working on a what we refer to fondly as the shit admin say Z, but most likely we will change that. We're thinking now of making it a larger resource. That's how to get shit done in your administration or how to get shit done in your institution, and then the shit admin say will be just one segment of that larger resource feed. So we're working with different student survivor-led groups across Canada to make that kind of a collaborative resource that has more of a grassroots ECP vibe, but probably will be longer than an actual zine. We released the 1 Year Later report, as you folks saw, and thanks to Sophie and Margot for taking part in the press conference with us around that and sharing their thoughts and feelings and experience and all the work that they've been doing. So that was a 70-page report that basically outlined all the work we did as Our Turn and also where we were going as SFCC. And one of the things that that report also did was we developed a resource on how to grade your own policy. So it explicitly kind of outlines how to use our resources, because our number one thing is we don't want to charge any of the student groups we work with on like for any of the materials that we create. The whole point is we want everyone to be able to access it. But we also realize that not everyone's going to know what like face-to-face protections are, gag orders are, external investigators, and some of the nuances that goes with that. So we developed this how-to guide so that you didn't even need to talk to us if you didn't want to. You could just use the policy, but understand kind of the nuances that we were looking for when we're grading policies. Also, we're working, as we all know, there's been a huge rise in folks being sued by predatory professors on campuses for defamation. And one of those humans is Professor Julie McFarlane at the University of Windsor. So we've been working with her a lot, actually, for about a year, but she recently was, I forget the word for it, not served, but basically she's now has a defamation suit against her from a former colleague for speaking out about his behaviors. And she does a lot of work on privacy law, and so we're really lucky that she's using this as an opportunity to start a larger conversation around how privacy law and confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements are used in cases of sexual violence in institutions. So we've done a bunch of podcasts with her. We're also connecting with groups that are actually doing similar work in the UK and sharing best practices to come up with a strategy for a campaign, basically, in the fall. So that's where we're heading with that, is we're just kind of getting our expertise in terms of, because privacy law, although there's FIPA in a lot of provinces, obviously not in Manitoba or Quebec, but even within the provinces that all are under FIPA, which is the Freedom of Information Privacy Protection Act, there's still nuances to each province. So we're figuring that out to be able to actually have a good campaign in the fall to figure this stuff out. So that's outreach. And then lastly, advocacy. We have been doing a lot of work. We are one of the few student groups that sits on the National Advisory Council on campus sexual violence. So this current government decided to make a priority dealing with gender-based violence. And so they came up with a bunch of different things, and one of them was they wanted to come up with a national strategy around campus sexual violence. Last time that I was here speaking to you folks, I got into some of the nuanced problems of the approach that they are taking. And so it's an ongoing kind of issue that we are in the spaces advocating for more students to be involved, for more students to be in the rooms. And we've had a lot of success around that, which is good. But the work kind of still continues to summarize that very quickly. We have been in Ontario working with the release of the provincial survey results that the previous Liberal government did on campus sexual violence. So it's some of the first statistics we have in Ontario. But of course, it's been presented in a way by the Ford government that makes it very inaccessible. And so we've been doing work with groups in Ontario to try and accessibilize that information so that it's useful to folks who are doing grassroots work on their campuses. In Quebec, we've been working around the privacy law stuff specifically, which I'm sure you folks have heard lots about. In Manitoba, we've been working with their Status of Women office on changes that need to be made to Bill 15, which is basically their Bill 151. We have created this huge, long lobbying doc, basically, in BC for Bill 23 of all the different changes that need to be made in Bill 23. Because really right now, if we're going to get anything done at the provincial level, in terms of like making really good legislation, our best bet is in BC. So that's why we have this long doc, and we're working with a bunch of different student groups, specifically the BC Federation of Students and the Vancouver Island Student Union on that document specifically. PEI got legislation, so we were supporting folks who were calling for the PEI government to create anti-campus sexual violence legislation, and they got it in December, which is super, super exciting. Not that it's fabulous legislation. Fabulous legislation doesn't exist yet in Canada, but they at least have legislation which forced the schools to actually create policies, which many of them did not have prior to that legislation. And then just last week, a member of our team, Alison Kilgore, was named, I'm not actually quite sure what the verb is, but basically she is now a sitting member of the Youth Working Group on Gender Equality in Canada. So that's kind of the advocacy work that we do. So you can kind of see from that we have a bit of an organizing model. And this is one of the things that we're hoping to transition more towards in the next year, or I'm hoping, like, as chair of this organization, that's the direction I'm taking this organization, is more of an organizing model. So that means right now we're very advocacy heavy, but as we know, the best way to get things done, and honestly the best tactic to make advocacy effective is to have an outreach campaign's organizing strategy. So we're restructuring our outreach to be less focused on communications and networking, and politicizing basically that communicating and that networking into actually creating organizing models across Canada and building up mobilization capacity around specific issues and cross-Canada solidarity. So as I said, one of the issues that we're wanting to work on is the privacy stuff. Another one that we're doing is the predatory prof, which then links in the education piece. So basically our education team does the research necessary to inform our campaign we do, which then gives us the opportunity to also, because we're for lack of a better word, lucky. I wouldn't necessarily say we're lucky. There's a much nuanced conversation to that. But we are in a lot of these government operating spaces, have been invited into a lot of these spaces. And so because of that, we are able to both push and for anyone who's worked with university administrators, you know you need like a good cop and a bad cop, and that's how you get stuff done. And with the government, often it's the same way. So we're going to move ourselves towards a model where we're able to push more from the outside as well as internally, and that's what we're moving towards. We also are just transitioning into, we just kind of are expanding our team of folks. So our capacity is going to like exponentially grow within the next year, especially because we won't be dealing with having to build an organization from the bottom. Kind of philosophy and approach like as an organization, which we would have, when we presented to you folks last year, we kind of let you know as well, is that because this work specifically, anti-sexual violence work on campuses, is often invisibilized and normalized, especially in like as community care, specifically by women of color, especially in a lot of our communities. We as an organization take an explicit approach that almost the entirety of our budget goes towards paying the labor. And even then, as you folks were seeing, like our budget is not huge. And one of the main problems that we're running into because of the neoliberal approach to nonprofit work that has kind of just happened is a lot of governments and or large donors who normally fund nonprofits. A lot of them have the mentality now, and this has just recently happened in the last couple of years, or I would say like probably like 5 to 7 years, is they don't provide funding for core, what they call core funding anymore, which is basically any funding to like keep the lights on and your doors open, which means paying your people. So basically any grant that we apply for, we can't put towards paying folks. So this is a problem that we are running into, also because we don't want to take money from any company whose ethics we do not agree with. And obviously that is a much more nuanced conversation that we can go into more, but so that's basically why you can see that over 2/3 of our budget is specifically dedicated towards paying labor. And even then we don't have the ability right now to pay properly by the hour. And so what we do is bi-weekly stipends to the folks that are working as a part of this organization. As part of this movement was what I was going to say, which sounds schlocky, so I changed it to organization. So that's kind of where we stand. We're having our annual general meeting in June where we're going to transition the new folks onto our team. We're actually really lucky that everyone who was on the team this year is staying, so it's going to preserve the institutional memory and build our capacity in terms of creating mentorship opportunities and working in new folks into our team to like hit the ground running. We're really excited about it. It'll be in Ottawa at the beginning of June, and that's where we will be actually finalizing kind of our campaign strategies for the next upcoming year, and also going province by province and figuring out our strategies for the issues that are affecting the groups that we work with in those regions, and how we can support the work that you folks are actually already doing on the ground, and how best we can situate ourselves to kind of be some outside pressure to support you folks. So that's my long-winded spiel about SFCC and where we're going. two-page report, you can see like there's a list of literally the projects that we are wanting to do next year. That is on our agenda of things that we are going to be doing. So I can talk more about budget, I can talk more about any of those projects, I can talk about any of the things that I just mentioned. Let me know if you have any questions, but the main thing that I'm here to say is thank you, because all of this only happened because you folks took a chance and funded us last year, and we're just really, really, really appreciative. So thank you.
So there's a question in the back, and I'm going to try and make sure that you hear it as best as possible. Rory, let me know if you can't hear.
I think my question was covered. The Ontario super secret project that you're going to let us in on, I think it's been covered, or? Yeah.
Could you hear the question?
There's no
word. The question was basically, I think it's been covered already. The Ontario project. It was about that. So.
Well, unless there's another story.
Is there any other project, or there was just the one that you spoke about, the super secret project?
For projects for next year?
Yeah.
Oh, no, there's so many. Okay, sorry, yes. Here, I'll pull up.
Sorry. I think the counselor just had a question about like whether there was any other super secret projects, but I think you answered their question.
Yeah.
So it's okay. Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah. John?
I'd like to make a motion.
Oh. It's not a question then, right?
It's not a question.
Okay. All right.
So are there any questions first?
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions for Connor before I let them go? All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us. There's no other questions for you, so enjoy your evening. And here is all right.
Counseling.
Have a good evening, Connor.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That went off without a hitch. John. All right, folks. There's a motion coming.
I'd like to make a motion. Be it resolved that the CSU renew Students for Consent Culture's grant of $25,000.
Right, do we have a second? Jared, your motivation, John?
The motivation is that the CSU has been SFCC's largest funder for the past year, as they were sort of going from a ragtag group of students trying to formally incorporate themselves and develop themselves into a true national organization. And they've really hit above their weight despite bizarre legal challenges that they should not have had to experience over the course of the summer. They've been involved with student organizations in many provinces, and they're really leading the charge in actually setting the standard of what a sexual assault policy at university should be. It's being used as the standard, it's helping influence legislation, and they're doing really good work. And it's because of not just the CSU, but the CSU is one of their biggest contributors at the moment. I would like to see that important work continue. I think we're getting good value for our dollars out of it. And finally, the reason I didn't submit a motion in advance of council is because I wasn't sure whether it makes sense to put on this year's budget or next year's. But having gotten a clear sense of what our end of year projections are looking like, I think we can afford to put it on this year's operations budget. So moving to move the $25,000 for this year and the next.
Thank you. Is there any questions, Rory?
Yeah, I move to amend to 35.
Okay. Is there a second? Jared, do you want to motivate?
I motivate just because last year they had asked for maybe 10 or 15, and we motioned to increase it to 25, which was more reasonable based on the budget that they presented. And I think that we can do the same thing this year. We have the extra money to give, and it's also just to account for economy growth and allowing them to expand, because we've heard from the presentation and the document that they need room to expand. So we're able to do so.
Okay, thank you. Is there any opposition to the amendment? All right, so the vote is for, the motion on the table is for 35. Is there any comments, questions? Okay, so if not, we can move to a vote. So all those in favor of allocating $35,000 to Students for Consent Culture Canada, please raise your placards. 16. All opposed? 0. So that carries. Is there anything else on this point, John? I don't think so. Okay, perfect. So with that, we can move on. Michelle?
I'm on the Facebook group. Have you posted
Oh,
the
sorry.
agenda?
That was the thing I had to do.
Thank you.
Well, the next one is would note presentation. Who's giving that? Oh. While you speak, I will do that.
I'll be brief. Basically, my name is Megan Quigley. I'm here on behalf of the Woodnote Housing Cooperative. I'm a support member with the Housing and Job Resource Center. So I support the provisional committee for the Woodnote in developing their policies, bylaws, and best practices as the Woodnote comes to form. And so, as you may know, well, I guess I'm just assuming everyone knows what the Woodnote is, but in summary, on April 17th, we broke ground for the Woodnote Housing Project, which is a cooperative housing project that will be housing up to 144 students with a priority for Concordia students. So due to the CSU's contribution to the project, there is an exclusive leasing agreement with the Woodnote that basically expresses that Concordia undergraduate students will be prioritized in the leasing process. And so the motion at hand, which I'll defer to John to actually read, is a motivation to amend the terms for the Woodnote to better reflect solidarity with students with access needs. So currently the Woodnote is being built with 90 units, 9 of which are universally accessible units. And so what that means is those units are designed to accommodate students or anyone, any residents with mobility adaptations. And so in solidarity with students in other universities, we are requesting an amendment to the exclusive leasing policy that allows students with access needs from universities other than Concordia to be prioritized in just those units over Concordia students that may not have access needs. And I can provide some more context and rationale to that decision, but I think I'm more interested in your questions than.
Yes, James.
Yes. You said 19 housing units?
So there's 90 units in the building, 9
Right.
of which are universities.
Okay, so 90 units in the building,
Mhm.
and 9 are universally accessible.
Yes.
Is there anything, yes, any other questions, comments? John?
So I move to adopt the amendments to the term sheet as presented.
Okay, through the second. Jane, your motivation, John?
As was just explained, it's only 9 out of 90 units, and our goal is to make affordable housing accessible to students. And these amendments, I don't think, set a precedent in terms of making the Woodnote not just for Concordia students, but we are in our goal to make the world a more accessible, equal, equitable place. Thing about whether we want to make sure that students with physical accessibility needs from other universities, maybe that is a good use of those resources. Only 9 units. It's not a big sacrifice, and it's just a chance to do some good.
Thank you. Okay, are there any more comments or questions? James?
Yes. Where can I see these amendments? Is it the?
Oh, they were sent out in the closed session document.
The closed session
Yeah,
documents?
it's called amendments, what's it
Okay,
called?
so this is the closed session document.
Yeah, but I guess they're not closed anymore,
Well,
John?
the term sheet itself isn't supposed to be public because it contains information about our investors. But it can give you, it basically does what was just talked about making those 9 units more.
Do you want me to, I can summarize?
Yeah,
Out of turn?
please.
So one of the conditions of the funding between the Woodnote and the CSU was an exclusive leasing policy. That exclusive leasing policy basically stipulates that the cooperative, which is standard for the majority of cooperatives, specifically housing cooperatives, has something called a complementary prioritization policy. That policy allows a cooperative in their leasing process to privilege certain applicants over others. That's the sort of policy that's used in a cooperative that, for example, privileges single mothers over other applicants. So that cooperative or that complementary leasing policy is currently in place to prioritize Concordia's undergraduate students. However, also has conditions that allow for students outside of the Concordia undergraduate population to reside in the building out of interest of the investment. So for example, if only 45 Concordia student undergraduates apply, the rest of the units aren't going to stay vacant. They then open up to other students. So the amendment that we are suggesting is to, in the complementary leasing policy, include a separate category for students outside of the Concordia student undergraduate population with access needs to be higher on the prioritization in solidarity with students with access needs at other universities.
Yes, James?
Would this policy only apply only after like CSU students have been like a lot, like the pool has been, like if there's extra like from the 9, so if there's less than, so for example, if there are 10 applicants with reduced mobility needs from the CSU, will those spots go to the CSU students?
Yes, so one distinction that maybe is helpful is as it stands, the accessible units are leased separate than the other units, and that is to prioritize students with access needs. So it's the rest of the units are being leased via a lottery process, whereas the accessible units are based prioritizing students with access needs. So in terms of prioritization, Concordia students with access needs will continue to be prioritized over non-Concordia students with access needs, but within that population, what we're hoping for is for within those 9 units, for Concordia students with access needs to continue to be top priority. Second priority would be other students with access needs, and then Concordia students at large.
Thank you. Well, you got a couple questions. Just
So, Paul, just so I understand.
you've had a couple questions, so I'll just let Chad go and then you go back. Chad?
So for the, I have so many concerns, but one of the things for the accessibility units, because let's say at one point at the end of the year, no Concordia students want to live on the other end of the island, and you have to open it up to the rest of the population. And let's say I graduate from Concordia, 2 years later, I want to go live there. You guys can't find Concordia students to fill up those units. I get my spot and I'm able to book, to rent, let's say, a place there. What if at one point enough people, let's say 75% of the residents there are not from Concordia? And the thing is like you can't necessarily kick out a tenant because it's pretty much like it's illegal. You kind of have to renew it. So what measures do you have to make sure that, is there a quota, a minimum quota? Let's say like at least 40% have to be from Concordia, whether we like it or not. Or my concern is more so like the people outside of Concordia that didn't pay for this cooperative to come to the apartment, love it so much because they're paying 10 to 20% less than the average market rate, and then be like, I don't want to leave in 5 years, I want to stay here forever. What is it that you can do to kick them out so that we can give that seat back to a Concordia student that pays for this?
I'm happy to respond to that. I will just say that I think that pertains more so to the term sheet at large and the exclusive leasing policy rather than specifically the amendment at hand. That being said, I'm totally willing to have this conversation. One process that is in place is that whereas in a building that you might apply to, there continues to be a complementary complementary privilege process, it would be the same for midterm lease transfers. And so because a co-op is able to exercise discretion as to who is offered a unit, the same would go for if 2 people were interested in the same unit, a Concordia student would continue to be prioritized. The mandate of the project is to offer accessible, affordable, and democratically run housing to Concordia students. If that no longer continues to be a need for Concordia students, then perhaps that's a success. I don't anticipate that need disappearing, but the way the leasing policy is established, Concordia students will continue to be prioritized throughout the leasing process, and that extends beyond the initial intake. So as the move-outs continue every July 1st, because we do have a grace period for students that have graduated, as someone that would graduate, 2 years later, you're not going to be even eligible to live in the building.
Can I do a follow-up?
Yeah.
Like, how would you, so my lease ended, right? I want to renew the lease, and usually it's automatically
You would not be invited to renew the lease. And the reason that's legal is because cooperative housing has something that is called a complementary, I'm losing it a little, it's a complementary prioritization. So it's not a negation of the Régie du Logement, rather it's a specific policy that's in place to support people that experience barriers and marginalization in housing.
So with the Régie, you'd be able to decline someone's renewal?
You wouldn't be declining someone's renewal, you wouldn't be prioritizing them in the application process because you would be prioritizing it before they
These
student.
people who live there
You've
have
had a
to
couple
reapply
questions now,
every year.
Jad, sorry, just because there's a lot of back and forth going on, and I think that the presenter
Okay.
answered your question. James?
Right, yeah, no, so, okay, so, I mean, I just want to confirm, like, if I understood your response earlier. Right, so just, so the policy would be, for example, if there were 10, you said, conversions we've heard, that's correct, so if there were, for example, 15 reduced mobility, 40 applicants, they would get the 9 spots. But if, for example, there were 5, then the other 4 would go to other, like, students from other universities that have reduced mobility needs before they go to, for example, CSU students who don't.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, that's a correct understanding of the.
Yes, exactly. And the context being we want to act in solidarity with other university students whose student unions aren't initiating these sorts of processes and don't think that they should have to burden the failures of other student organizers in terms of lacking in mobilizing student housing.
Jane?
Call question?
We haven't had a lot of speakers yet. There's only 2 more questions though. Usually it's 8 speakers. Roy?
Yeah, I'm still not sure that Jad's question has been answered, and I actually have the same thought. Are you saying that this complementary agreement explicitly allows you to derogate from the Civil Code of Quebec that provides priority already to someone who's already within a lease? Like when you talk about they just won't be reprioritized compared to other people, if they're living there and they don't say anything, their lease is automatically renewed by law.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're saying they're no longer prioritized, well, they live there.
Just to
Like you
clarify,
have to then kick them out before you reprioritize them. So I just don't understand how that's working.
we wouldn't be kicking them out because their lease would continue. So the problem with the question was the assumption that their lease would end and whether or not we would renew it. We're not renewing leases because, as you know, in Quebec, leases are automatically renewing. The only time we're assessing an applicant is when they're signing a new lease agreement. And just to be clear, this is all being consulted and administered with the Housing and Job Resource Center, which, for your information, supports students in their housing and legal needs.
Jad?
So basically, if at one point, how many people can live there? 90?
144.
So let's say 144 residents in that building are not from Concordia. You guys did the process. Again, no one wants to live on the other end of the island. You have no one. You open it up to the public, and then 144 people that go to UQAM or anywhere else decide to live there, and no one renews the lease for 7 years.
So once again, this is not pertaining to the amendment that's on the table, but to answer your question, yes, because that's the terms agreement that the CSU developed in collaboration. Because this is a confidential document and I'm not actually authorized to speak to that agreement that was made, I'm hesitant to continue with this line of questioning, but I will say pertaining to the amendment that is at hand, yes, that could be true, that those 9 units may potentially be filled exclusively with students with access needs not from Concordia.
Do you have a follow-up?
So basically, if those 9 seats were filled out by people that are not disabled, that do not have the priority thing, there's no way for you to kick that person out to be able to make space for that person in need. No legal measure that you can take.
No, that would be illegal.
That would be
Illegal. It is
Okay.
illegal to end someone's lease before the end of their lease, or if we were to give them the appropriate compensation for ending their lease. However, if their lease were to legally end through their measures, whether or not they wanted to legally non-renew their lease, or whether or not they decided to sign a limited term lease, then we would be able to renegotiate. Then we would be able to invite applications for that unit. We will not be illegally breaking leases.
Thank you. Roy? Sophie?
Recall the question?
There we go. All right. There's actually a couple of speakers before, and the question's been called. Is there a second? Jane, is there any opposition to calling the question? No. All right. So in that case, question's been called. So all those in favor of amending the term sheet, please raise your placards, or approving the amended term sheet. My apologies. 10. All those opposed? 0. So motion carries.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for
If you want
coming.
to know more about the project, you can come in. You can talk to the release leader.
Right.
Don't do it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and present to us this evening. And we will move on with our agenda. And I'm sure I don't have to say it, but it is a very lengthy agenda. So for speakers' turns, like try not to repeat things that have already been said, please. So keep your comments novel ideas. So now we're on 6 appointments. The Open Educational Resource Committee has a seat open. And Sam, this one's yours.
Do I need to say anything?
I mean, if you want to explain what the committee is, I know everyone, in case anyone wasn't here for the presentation, just brief.
Yeah. Okay. So the OER is basically a committee that is focusing on making educational materials more accessible to students. Danielle's on the committee. I can't be there because it's like they meet while I work, so there's like no point of me being a part of it. If you're available from 9 to 5 and you care about making educational materials more accessible, it's a fun environment to be in. It's interesting. You get to work with professors and the admin. And I also heard that there might be bursaries involved with those who get themselves involved. So yeah, if you want to join, it's really fun, it's really interesting, and yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Jane?
Is it only open to counselors?
It has to be someone from the CSU, involved with the CSU.
Eduardo?
Is it only open to CSU counselors or also executives?
Let me check the email. She said it's someone from the CSU, I think.
Sometimes administrators don't know.
Yeah, Michaela, can you clarify?
I'm the academic advocacy coordinator, so usually it goes through my position and it goes through appointments committee. I'm guessing that this is some kind of, not ad hoc, but kind of like I guess an ad hoc because it's a special thing that came up in impromptu committee. Am I correct? Okay. So it can be any CSU member.
Yeah, student rep, just someone who represents.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a counselor. You could have a formal process or it could be someone from this room.
Danielle?
I can just follow up on them. They actually told me at the meeting that it's just a student representative. That's what they're looking for. So
That's what I was saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Rory?
Sorry, when did you say it meets?
Like during the week, like 9 to 5, because that's their hours.
Oh, yeah, okay, it's one of those.
Yeah.
Danielle?
They have lunches.
Okay. Does anyone want to nominate themselves? Rory?
Yeah, I'll self-nominate.
Okay, do we have a second? Jad? Jane?
I was actually going to push this to next council just because this is the last council meeting with this set of councilors. When they meet next year, those who are currently councilors may not be councilors next year. That way we can give it to someone who will be a councilor next year who will be able to attend it as a councilor for the full year.
Okay, there's a motion to table. Is there a second? Okay, you've already kind of motivated for it. So as per the motion passed in August, we allow discussion on a motion to table to a set date. So therefore, discuss. Rory?
Oh, gee, I didn't think I was first, but there's a couple things. One, as a representative, I mean, I'm the one that's nominated so far, right? So I'm just speaking from my perspective. I'm already on some university committees that meet over the summer, regardless if I remain a counselor, and that's okay because I've been on these committees for the past while, and I've been contributing, and it's nice to have that continuity. Also, just because you're no longer a representative doesn't mean you still can't represent students or student needs on a committee like that. Plus the fact that I have the experience having been a representative.
Thank you. Jad?
Because is our last meeting, like we would want to get as much work done. I understand like the point of pushing it, but they are looking for a student rep, so by the time you meet, you're gonna be a student rep. So I figure like let's just, unless they do over
Sorry.
something.
Didn't mean to cut you off. Brett?
Yeah, I'm not gonna say much. I think I'm against pushing this to the next meeting because we struggle to fill seats overall. There's gonna be a ton of open seats in the next meeting because of people leaving. So I think it's best we fill seats as much as possible. And if there's people who here are willing to do it, I'm happy with that.
Danielle?
We're also filling out our bursaries in June, and they need it done very soon. So like, we have to decide basically tonight. They were emailing me back and forth being like, this has to be done by like this week, because they need a student representative by the end of May.
Chris?
Yeah. I'd like to speak to the mess that we got into ourselves last year by waiting too long on appointing certain positions. I mean, let's just do as much as possible, as immediate as possible, and that way we can have the most efficient CSU possible.
Thank you. Sam?
Point of information. So if we do appoint somebody now, does it mean that by May 31st, when our positions finish, per se, that they also leave, or they get to keep that position?
No, because they're a continued student. So, because it's not a counselor position, it's like a CSU member, if I understand correctly. Yeah, so CSU member means any undergraduate who pays fees to the Concordia Student Union. So, if they continue to be a member, then.
How? Order?
Yes.
Don't student appointments usually go through appointment committee? Like,
Usually, yes.
is that, or no?
It was requested to me specifically, so I don't like to come to council, so
Okay.
is it a specific situation?
I don't know. It feels like if it's supposed to be a student seat, then there's like a call-out process that goes on so that we're giving everyone and not just people who are in this room a shot. I understand that there is a time commitment though, so if it's like very urgent, then that's fine, but I would just strongly advise that in future for people who are staying until next year, as Michaela said, go through the academic and advocacy coordinator, do the call-out process, and go through appointments committee, because that way you can get a wide variety of people who might be interested in open educational resources.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a motion on the table to table this currently. So all those in favor of tabling this to next meeting, please raise your placards. 4. All those opposed? 9. Okay, so that fails. The motion is still on the table. Yeah, just for some context, ad hocs are a little bit strange because they're not standing, like, they're not the regular committees that we talk about when we say going through appointments, and they kind of decide their own membership, so it's a little bit of a nebulous on whether council should or appointments committee should. So I guess that's a decision council can make, whether they want to appoint a counselor or open it up. Back to the main speakers list. Rory. Jane? It was the before speakers list.
Oh, I will nominate myself.
Okay, do we have a second? Jared? Okay, so there's 2 nominations. Is there anyone else? Okay, so in that case, Rory, why do you, oh, sorry, James.
Oh, well, I guess we just motion to appoint Rory.
Oh, well, I was just gonna go through the, why.
Oh,
Yeah, there's 2 people as well.
Sorry.
So it has to go through secret ballot as per our own procedures.
Sorry. Whoops.
Rory.
My bad, I rescind my motion.
Yes.
I wasn't speaking.
Oh no, I was gonna say, why would you like to sit on the OER if you would like to speak to it?
It's something that I'm passionate about. I've been passionate about it for the last 4 or 5 years. I've worked with a lot of faculty members within JMSB and with some of the other faculties in terms of making textbooks and resources needed for a class much more accessible, be it digitally, be it without cost, finding agreements with publishers between the profs so that the prof might get a better deal on just the parts of the textbook that they need, and then the students don't end up having to pay for the full thing. So it's something I've worked on before and I'm passionate about moving forward. So it's something I'd like to contribute to.
Thank you. Jane.
Yes, so I'm not counseling next semester. I also have a smaller course load. I also think it would be nice to have some more factor parity in terms of who's on this council. Danielle, who is the other CSU rep, is a Gen 3 student. So having someone else from, say, arts and science or fine arts or Concordia School of Engineering to have more clarity in terms of who's on the committee would be nice.
Thank you. Okay, is there anything else to discuss before we move to secret ballot? Okay, drat, now I need paper. Sorry, I wasn't expecting us to do appointments. Does anyone have paper?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's okay. I'm getting pretty good at this.
Chicken, or if you don't want to go with animals, there's the one that got one chicken at a time, okay?
Yeah, I'll take the minutes back.
James, go for it. I leave you a message.
All right, everyone give me their papers. All good? I just need to steal you for one more. I need somebody to watch me as I count first. Yeah. All right, I'll be back in 2 seconds. All right, folks, so congratulations to Rory. You have been appointed to the Open Educational Resource Committee. Is there anything else to discuss under this agenda point? Okay, so if not, we can move on to substantive. Where did my agenda go?
You voted and you never gave it in.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. I yelled out if anyone has any more votes.
I didn't hear it.
Sorry. Anyways, it's it wouldn't have made a difference. Right? The scrutineer and I agree. All right. So the next point on the agenda is new business 7A, which is Indigenous reparations. And Jane, if you'd like to start with the motion.
Sure. So, whereas the Concordia Student Union Council has adopted serious positions supporting Indigenous rights, whereas the CSU Council passed a motion in the June RCM of 2014 concerning a territorial acknowledgement being made prior to all meetings, whereas territorial acknowledgements represent an important step in decolonizing relationships within Concordia University, whereas territorial acknowledgements are not enough, be resolved that a new budget line be created under operational costs entitled Indigenous reparations. Be it further resolved that the CSU reserve $2,500 per annum to be listed under this newly created budget line in the operations budget, and that the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal be the recipient of this reparation. Be it further resolved that the amount be given to the shelter within 15 business days of the September RCM.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Jared, your motivation, Jane?
Right, so first I'd like to say that I reached out to the Native Women's Shelter Montreal first to see if they would be okay with receiving this creation. So they were ecstatic, they thought it was a great idea. I also reached out to the First People Studies MA. They approved the motion, and I also reached out to Indigenous Directions. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to meet with them to go over the motion, but it is in line with their mandate and what they seek to do within Concordia. Now, after that, right, so historically the CSU executive team as well as council has been mostly settlers. So we are on unceded land, we take advantage of these resources, and we benefit extremely from being here. Concordia itself, the fact that we're here, we're contributing towards the continued gentrification of the downtown Montreal area, which is historically home to a lot of Indigenous homeless people within Montreal. It's also a very small amount of our operational budget. This year we had about $1,850,000. So this represents less than 0.14% of our operational budget. So it's very, very minute. It's a drop in the budget. I will say that even considering other funds we have available, like the Community Action Fund, this is even less than we give out for that fund. The reason why I'm saying we should create this budget line and give it out to this group is that this way fund is not dependent on the CSU. The organization has right to do with it whatever it will, and ultimately this will benefit Indigenous people within Montreal. The shelter gives services to Inuit women, status and non-status Indigenous people, and yeah, land acknowledgements are just not enough.
Thank you. Chris?
Yes. So I actually spoke with a representative of the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal. The PSSA just did an event last weekend where we donated $1,000 that we raised from ticket revenue to go to the shelter. So undoubtedly this is an important organization in Montreal. I do want to raise, and I'd like other people's opinions in the room, I just find it kind of strange raising a motion and just giving money to an organization without there being a greater context or an event associated with it. So really, I just want to ask the people in the room, does this seem like a normal thing to do? Is this something we support, or is this a bit of an odd way about going about something that's good? So yeah.
Thank you. Michaela?
Yeah, I have a question, just in terms of, I think it's a really great initiative, but I think it should be more focused on the Concordia context, because we have the Aboriginal Student Resource Center, for instance. This year, we supported them in childcare, like during exams, where we give some money to the Aboriginal Student Resource Center to support them, and I think they're in great need of funds. And also, we could donate to First Voices Week. I feel like there's a lot of different areas in Concordia where we'd be helping Indigenous students at Concordia, and that would be more focused in our mandate of the CSU, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, full disclosure bias before I go on, like, I would give like $250,000. Like, that's my bias, so the way I'm gonna vote might be reflected in that. But, finance side coming back in, I wanna know a little bit, because this is kind of like a charitable donation in a sense. I wanna know how much of our operating budget goes into similar charitable activities and how much space we have of extra space, like from our budget that's not spent, because budget and actuals differ.
We have there's two parts to that question. One
Yeah.
is what's the state of our finances, and two is are grants like this normal? And the first question, are grants like this normal? Yes. Usually it's not done through the council motion. Usually it's through various grant bodies of the CSU. So usually Community Action Fund, maybe external committee grants, maybe BIPOC grants, maybe sustainability grants. There's a couple different pots of funding people can access, and usually get them out through there when people apply. So that's usually the way it goes about. But if we decide when we proactive make a donation in solidarity with the cause, just like we're a student union, we want to support this cause and whatever it is, that is legitimate. As long as you can make the case at council that it's justified use of the funds, the amount in question is pretty small. 2,500 on a budget of 2.6 million is peanuts. So just noting that. In terms of the state of the finances, I've been working on that over the last couple of days, today and really late last night. So numbers still aren't final, but they're actually looking quite good. So projected operations surplus is a lot higher than I expected. Hojo's doing better than expected. Advocacy is doing better than expected. Legal and official is doing way better than expected. Clubs is in a deficit, but a much smaller deficit than expected. So when we did the revised budget back in February, we projected a consolidated, so all the budgets combined, consolidated deficit of about 30,000. Now we're looking at a consolidated surplus of between 60 and 95,000.
Okay, but can I
Do you have a follow-up? Yeah.
Yeah, so for two of those, I just want to hone in a little bit more on the specific numbers I want. So what percentage or dollar amount roughly, because I know it's not final or anything, goes into like charitable stuff, like grants and stuff? And what dollar amount surplus is there in the operating budget? Roughly, again, because I know the numbers aren't final. Do you have like an estimate of those?
Okay, bear with me here.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have one budget, say charity donations, and give me a list. But we have a couple contracts with organizations which give core funding for these. So a lot of our sustainability, so like Waste Not, Want Not, the Farmers Market. We give $5,000 to First Voices Week. We gave $25,000 to Student for Consent Culture last year. Now $25,000, that'd be the biggest one. Most of the time that we give to community organization types, be the Community Action Fund. Sometimes it's on just like a, just support an operating grant for the year. Sometimes it's on a project basis. So usually those, the Community Action Fund should be the most common one for non-Concordia organizations that we give money to. It's going to be between 1,000 and 3,000. And they give 50,000 a year to projects like that.
Okay.
Thank you. Sam? Oh my god, I'm so sorry. So sorry. Sorry, Your speaker's turn? Sam.
No, I accidentally opened something. I was looking for a document.
Sophie? Oh, Sophie, sorry. Jane?
Yeah, so in terms of giving to an internal organization versus external, the reason why I'm putting this organization is that they do a lot of good for the surface and the most marginalized people in the shop community. Yeah, if you are attending or you're already at a certain level of privilege, if you are a service user of the University of Montreal, you are by far way more marginalized as an individual and could use these funds a lot more. We do give a lot of money to external organizations. There's the SAF fund, the CAF fund. All committees tend to give out funds, and like John said, these are like this is peanuts. This is less than 0.14% of our operational budget of this year, and next year's probably going to be even higher. So I would really encourage everyone to vote yes. I know that there is no context, but honestly, if you're here and if you are not Indigenous, you benefit directly from colonialism. I really can't emphasize that enough. This is a super minor thing that you can do as a settler in Montreal. Very tiny action, and I really encourage you to vote yes for this motion.
Sorry about that.
I think a common complaint with land acknowledgements is that they don't hold a lot of value. Some people wonder why we do them. I think this gives power to that statement that, we do appreciate the land that we are. We recognize what our history has done to the Indigenous community, and I think it's a great idea. It opens up a discussion. It makes a statement from the CSU, and it helps Indigenous communities.
Sorry, can I take your personal privilege, I think? So I think like James Hanna was asked to leave by security earlier so Princess could stay in the room, and he's still here. I like Princess is live streaming right now about like how he's been allowed to stay in this room and she's had to leave like yet again.
I have no authority to kick anyone out. It has to be security to do it.
Can we vote to have him removed so that we can continue and Princess can come back here?
Actually, no.
Like for real, no?
No.
Because this is like really like profoundly messed up.
point of personal interest though, I would like to point out that he's actually a board member here, and he has a
That's why, like, the
duty
board.
feature. So like, I kind of want to point that out, and just, it's a bit of a yikes to be trying to remove a fellow board member. So anyways.
Like, if you wanted to, like, the board, okay, sorry, the board can't vote to vote a board member out. Because if they could, then in situations where somebody was voting against a motion, like, a board could just vote out its own members, so that's why that's in place. Whether or not people can stay in the room, like, this is something that is way above my head, and security or the police have to deal with it. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know what the situation is, I don't know, like, what the legal situation is especially, and, like, I personally cannot kick a board member out of the room.
I figured it would be worthwhile to ask, because this is obviously a problem.
But the complaint is noted on record, and if there's any further action that needs to be taken by external bodies, like, may they come to me and we'll deal with it, but I cannot, and nor can the room kick someone out. So that's where that stands. Eduardo? Alright, if anyone wants to take a recess?
Sure,
Sure. Okay, there is food still left. If anyone is everyone okay with a 10-minute recess? 5-minute recess? Yeah, because we do have a lot of points to get through. So if anyone wants to take a 5-minute recess, like, just go to the bathroom, come back quick. Alright, so getting back to the agenda point, we are on Indigenous reparations. And Victoria, you have the floor.
I just wanted to say, because Chris was saying there was no cause for it, and Michaela was also saying that we have a society for that. So what if we had put the money through, like, when they have one of their events or whatever, and that's when we donate it, and kind of make it like, like a reason to be donating during their Aboriginal week or something like that, so it gives it some context. And then they also get their money to an organization that's like worthwhile.
Can I respond?
Yeah, it was a question.
So the reason why I'm motioning to just give them the money instead of giving them this money so that they can use it for events is that this way.
No, sorry, that's not what I was saying. Sorry, just because I want to correct you for that. I'm saying we give the money as a donation check, but instead of just giving it on a random day, we give it during one of the weeks that they have those like celebrations or whatever. So we can kind of say like, this is something that's important. The CSU thinks it's so important that we're donating to this external source to kind of just give it some meaning / like it already has enough meaning, but just so students are aware that we're doing it and like it brings awareness to like.
We're more of a service provider shelter. They don't really do these sort of larger scale events. It's more to help with their operational costs and help support their services.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's attend at all. I'm just saying.
Okay, there's been a back and forth point, but yeah, right. Jared?
Yeah, I just want to say, we always have land acknowledgements. At the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. I mean, it's less than 0.2%. It's the least we can do. The only reason that, like, most of us are here in the first place is colonialism. It's time to give back.
Thank you. Sorry, I lost my speakers list. James?
Oh, yeah. So I have, like, people are kind of saying that this is, we're trying to give back, we're giving money, except we're not. The motion is written in such a way that, number one, it's just a random motion in council. It has no real authority other than a motion, and it can be repealed just as easily by another motion of council. And guess what that would be? That would be a budget without that line.
Point of order?
Yes?
This is,
Oh,
no,
sorry.
no, not
Sorry,
only.
I have a point of order. Motions that push for a budget line to be created for this are binding as corporate resolutions, right?
Also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Like in Robert's rules, if you undo, like if the motion has been enacted, you can't just have like a simple resolution to undo a motion, as you would like if you say. I'm trying to think of an example. Like if the motion's been put in place, you can't just have a simple motion to reverse it. I hope that made sense.
Well, what happens when there's a budget without that line?
It's in violation of
Yeah.
the motion, and the union is in breach of its duty.
What?
Bring
To
it into
the
conformity with the
board?
motion.
Yeah.
The past board?
It's still a board, like, it's a board that passed a motion, and motions that are passed. For example, the creation of the Woodnote Housing Co-op came out of a motion in a referendum when I was not the executive, and yet it is still a project that we are overseeing.
Thank you. Did that answer your question, James? Right, Jane?
I call the question.
Okay, there has been sufficient people. All right, is there a second for calling the question? Jared, is there any opposition to calling the question? All right, so the question's been called. All those in favor of the motion?
Can we go to a secret ballot?
Yeah, okay, we can vote on a secret ballot. Is there a second for a secret ballot? James, all those in favor of voting by secret ballot, please raise your placards.
I thought based on the resolution that started this year, as long as two people want to go by secret ballot, then we do secret ballot.
When was that passed?
The same thing at the beginning of the year, for when we have two members, two nominees for one position, we go into secret ballot automatically. It's the same thing if one person wants secret ballot, we do secret ballot.
We did
doing
vote
that as a
on that.
convention.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
That's just the convention we've been using. so-
Yeah, sorry, that was my mistake. Okay, well, then in that case, do we have a mover and a seconder? Well, we have a mover. Do we have a seconder? There we go. Okay, so if everyone's okay with secret ballot, I don't know.
Point of order?
Yep.
This is a secret ballot as to whether or not we call the question, not a secret ballot on the
No,
motion.
hey, no one said no to calling the question.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's good.
Okay, that's what I want to clarify.
I just asked and then everyone was cool with it. So it's all good. Does anyone have paper? I have paper. Thank you so much. I need to start bringing the books to council. Yes.
Any more paper?
Oh no, it's in case Sophie gave me some. But here, I'll just. I should move that we have a budget paper. No, definitely not. Well, that is bad. Scared my mind. I need This way. Remember, you can vote yes, no, or abstain. Was that over here?
There's a lot of
All right, just to clarify, everyone voted? All good? I'm gonna go count.
It's not. That's why I said yes and
All right, folks. So we've counted the ballots. on this agenda point? Okay, if not, we can move on to electoral reform. And Jane, this one's yours.
Just gonna bring up the does anyone else have the motion? Oh, here it is, perfect. Sorry about that. So I made a small amendment to the motion, so I'll just read out and then point out where the amendment is. So whereas first past the post-electoral systems lead to governance that can be representation of a minority population, whereas, and this is the amendment, whereas a ranked ballot system enables the electoral body to be more fully represented in their elected government, be resolved that the Electoral Reform Ad Hoc Committee be struck for June 2019. Be it further resolved that the Ad Hoc Committee mandate be to propose amendments to the standing regulations and bylaws as to enact a ranked ballot system for the Concordia Student Union elections. Be it further resolved that the proposed amendments be sent to referendum to be voted on in the 2019 by-elections, and another amendment, be it further resolved that the composition of this Ad Hoc Committee be 2 councillors, 2 members at large, and 1 executive.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Arad, your motivation, Jane?
Right, so a ranked system would enable the Concordia population to not just try and divide their eggs into one basket, but instead vote how they feel they would be represented. It wouldn't increase any kind of cost because it would be in one election, and it would strengthen the democracy of our organization, which many members, including James Hanna, likes to point out democracy is good. We should always try and strengthen our democracy, as James Hanna likes to point out. Yay.
Should we not refrain from using other councillors' names and stuff like that?
I mean, you can speak about counselors. It's better if you say, like, my fellow counselor, but you can refer to somebody else in the room. You just shouldn't say you.
I think we can all admit that tone was a little bit
You-ish, yeah.
Okay. Point taken. My apologies. I thought you were being funny. Continue.
And no, that's it. Just strengthening democracy is good. I think we all agree that that's a good thing. And many of us in the room have said that many times during council meetings.
Thank you. Patrick?
I would advise against voting for this motion because part of what I will be undertaking as chair of policy committee is to actually be redoing the elections policies. So I do not recommend this motion because this is going to be part of my work. And having 2 committees to do the exact same thing is counterproductive to the efficiency of this union. And therefore, I highly suggest you don't support this. That's all.
Thank you. Arad?
Yeah, so I just wanted to know, I just wanted to know a little bit more about how it works because I haven't ever voted with a ranked ballot system, but I guess you put your top 3 favorites or whatever in order, and there's a weighting or something like that because you just do ranked ballot at me, so now I haven't done any research on it. So could you elaborate a little bit?
Sure. Do you want to explain?
Sure. Well, the ranked ballot concept, as just what you mentioned, in terms of the details, that is not for me nor council to decide. That's why I'm moving to create this ad hoc committee so that they can go into the finer details of how they would implement the system. But theoretically, a ranked ballot is just that you have all the candidates and then you rank them in the order that you would like them to be elected.
And follow up, why is an ad hoc doing it and not the actual elections committee? I'm sure they can do it, and they should.
Yeah.
That is the
Yeah. The current one we have is the Elections and Participation Committee, and that was an ad hoc committee that was only made for this year. At the, I believe it was the February or March council, Patrick mentioned that the purpose of that committee had been filled in terms of its mandate to implement online voting, and so that committee was effectively shut down, and that's why I'm going to have this committee created so that it has a more detailed mandate, and it's technically replacing that since that one no longer exists.
Thank you. John?
Yeah. So I support the idea of moving towards ranked ballots. It's just more democratic than first past the post, but it's a lot easier to do with the online voting system than it would have been with paper ballots, which take a long time. So generally, I think it's a good direction to move, and I think we should have, in some way, as consensus, I do want to move towards that. How to get there is a different question, If it's just creating an ad hoc to explore one issue, I don't think that's necessary. If you're going to form ad hoc, we better talk about a wide range of the issues within the elections policy, maybe it was comprehensive reform, rather than just this one issue. So either if you go to an ad hoc committee direction, you should have an expanded mandate, which could include doing that, but not just that. Or if we decide that we just want to do that one thing, maybe mandating the policy committee to do those implementations of the policy reform. So that's just my thought on that. I do think it's a good idea to move towards the right thought system, but either expand the ad hoc or just target the motion towards policy.
Thank you. Samantha, do you have any ideas on how it says here on the motion, two-tier voting system would affect slates? So right now with the KCB, there isn't just, whoever wins the most amount of votes, there's a chance that there is a mix of slates that become execs, and then there's a chance that it's the same slate that becomes execs. How does the two-tier voting system affect the selection of, of executives? And honestly, what would the second tier be? Because I do know a lot about electoral systems, and I support the idea that first past the post has a lot of problems within it. Do you have any thoughts on it? Do you have any, are there any proposals that you've added to it along the way?
So I actually amended to the rank balance instead of two-tier or two-round voting because of some issues that, as the president have pointed out, in terms that it would increase the cost of the election, because we're essentially running two elections, which means twice the campaigning, twice the voting period. This just keeps it to the one voting section. And in terms of how it affects slates, well, according to our standing regulations, people don't run as one unit, they run individually, and they can choose to associate as slate. And as we've seen this year, as we've seen 2 years ago, mixed slate teams happen. And honestly, I would argue that that's a good thing. It creates diversification of ideas and in terms of how the CSU goes forward, and it's not just one uniform, hive mind.
Thank you. Next I have Sam.
I feel like it's a great idea to cover this topic. First Past the Post has issues that can be easily addressed with new election systems. I also want to note that our country was a big supporter of finding new ways to vote, even though the government didn't carry that out. But I think it's a sentiment that a lot of students have, and I think we should definitely explore that. It allows students to have more freedom to express who they want to be elected, while also protecting their interests. Yeah.
Thank you. Rory.
Yeah, regardless of the procedure and how we do it, or whether we should be doing it right now, I do agree with a ranking system for the sole scenario of where there's, say, 3 candidates and each candidate gets less than 50% of the vote because there's 3 and it's split, and then you take the losing candidate, you find all the ballots that had them as their first choice, and then you defer to their second choice. So it basically gets all the people who voted for the losing party, or the third party, a second chance to vote. It doesn't mean everyone needs to re-vote, but it allows there to be a little bit more democracy in when it comes down to just 2 choices, A or B, one of them getting more of a majority than the other person. So for that reason, I do support this initiative, but only within those sort of constraints.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, so first I have a procedural question before I continue. Do ad hoc committees expire at the next mandate?
I was actually just looking up the exact regs on ad hoc committees. There's nothing that... Yes?
So technically, I'm the only member of the committee, so
Yeah.
it exists. We could just do appointments.
It says the council can create them.
No. So, yeah, no. I do think that there's good sentiment behind this motion, but there's one kind of more structural question in that I believe that the CSU would be very, it would benefit the CSU to have a permanent standing committee about elections and finding out stuff related to electoral policies. especially when it comes to determining if rule breaking is occurring, interpreting the elections regulations, issuing new elections rules as they come forward. Instead of just creating ad hoc committees, it would benefit us more to create kind of simply an elections committee with a broader mandate to see that the democratic will of the people is fulfilled. Now, I'm not necessarily against the a ranked voting system. I think I actually proposed it at some point within the last year. Might have mentioned it at some point. But I don't think that I think we should probably just create a standing committee about these issues instead of just let's rely on an ad hoc committee with kind of this very, very narrow purpose is going to disappear and we're going to have to create something else. If John says that we have an elections and participation committee, I would much rather have the elections and participation committee, be promoted from an ad hoc committee to a standing committee of the CSU. Maybe modify the mandate a bit instead of just okay, let's just start creating ad hoc committees upon ad hoc committees and just have a permanent thing that looks after what the elections are. So yeah, no, I think that it's going in the right direction, but I don't think it's the right implementation of this. If there's some amendment to change it into, if this committee still exists, to graduate it into a standing committee, and then don't remove the very narrow focus, but just look into the election system, making it more fair, and then add an addendum saying look into this and see if we can implement it fairly, right? Because I don't think I think the original motion had a 2-round system, which would have been a horrible idea. We barely get enough people voting the first round. If we're going to try to do 2 rounds of voting, especially if it's during the final season, I don't think we're going to have very, very good luck with that. So I do think a ranked ballot system, but there are lots of ranked ballot systems. There's a Condorcet system. There's a there can be a different type of system for councillors. I think we should use something more along the lines of single transferable vote system for councillors when there's multi-member constituencies. And I don't think we should just, there are different ways to do it, and I think that they should be tasked with investigating all of them instead of saying, we want to implement this one and see which one's better for the union, to graduate it to a standing committee.
Thank you. Jake?
Yeah, so, just one question first. What is the composition of the elections participation committee?
Consists of 2 executives, a number of councillors. I think that they have 4 to 6. I think there's space for some members at large as well. The easiest procedurally thing to do is just to refill that committee and continue to work with exploring elections and participation.
It's possible to amend my motion.
Not after speaking.
Okay.
But, sorry. Chris? Oh, here, I'll bring it back on. Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak. First of all, I think it's a great initiative to talk about a 2-round electoral system. What I don't like is creating a motion that's going to create a very rigid direction for a committee that probably should be very open-ended and looking into different possibilities. So there's going to be a new policy committee next year. There could be a new elections committee or policy can take it on. There's going to be a whole new council full of whole new people with all new ideas. And I feel like just giving them the opportunity to take things in whatever direction they see best would be more effective than taking your direction, an outgoing councillor, and imposing it on those people. So I think the best solution would be, if policy is meeting next semester, you could go to those meetings and have your voice heard, rather than imposing rigidity, which I think will slow us down in getting towards, because if people don't even want that on the new council, they're not going to work hard for it and it's just going to fall apart.
Thank you. Let's avoid the U's in the future. Eduardo is there.
Yeah, could I amend to merge the committee specified in Jane with the regular elections committee?
So you want to amend the motion to say the elections and participation committee?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second? Jane, do you want to motivate Eduardo?
Yeah, we have already a ton of committees. directly deal with, and we actually only have 15 counselors coming in next year, so everyone's gonna be stretched pretty thin. So taking away as many ad hoc committees and keeping them down to a minimum is probably the most important things. Plus the fact that Patrick's already gonna be doing some election reforms. It's just plain efficient to have one committee take care of everything than have a bunch of committees running around doing little parts.
Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, Patrick?
I oppose this because, as I said earlier, is that my main focus is going to be doing this through policy committee. I'm open to bringing in Jane if she wants to come to policy committee to talk about this when we're doing this, but I think creating a new committee or doing the elections participation committee, I don't think that's the right move. I think we can be doing this informally through policy committee. And I think this is just, it's going to be inefficient to just have more than one committee doing the exact same thing. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the amendment on the table is to change the, I think it said elections committee to the already formed elections and participation committee. Jared?
I mean, with all due respect, I think this is the right move. We already have a committee. We could easily just make this a part of it, fill this committee, and then work on getting this done, rather than just this committee kind of maybe existing, but also maybe not existing, and then it goes to policy, and now the what was the name of the elections
And participation committee.
participation is like, I mean, what will happen next year? Is it like a limbo committee, or we could just make it a permanent committee that just oversees elections? I think that's a little easier.
Thank you. Michaela?
To call the question, it's almost 9.
It's on the amendment, so there's only been a couple speakers so far. Sorry. Sophie, did you have anything to say there?
Well, I think that a discussion is not necessarily going to help this point of view. I think we should just wait on it.
Sophie? Okay. This is just on the amendment to change elections to elections and participation. So if there's no further speakers, all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your placards.
Can you please reiterate the amendment?
Yeah, so the amendment is just to change, the exact wording. How is it worded in the motion? The elections committee, I think it said, to the elections and participation committee, like the one that already exists. So it's changing the committee being spoken about in the document to being the elections and participation committee. Is everyone okay with that? Yep.
So that would mean that the elections and participations committee, for the wording of the document, would be tasked with just
Yes.
this.
I mean, not just, like you can add things, but for the moment, it would be
Okay,
this.
yeah, in this amendment.
Yeah. All right, so all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your placards. 7, all those opposed? 1, 2. All right, so the. Noted? Okay, so it's Patrick. All right, and that was in opposition. Okay, so the amendment carries and we're back on the main motion, except now it's the elections and participation committee that's being mandated with this. Michaela?
It was also to call the question.
Okay, there have been enough speakers. The question's been called. Is there a second for calling the question? All right, sorry, not the question's been called, but we will vote on it. Yeah?
So does that mean that the composition stays the same? Does the composition change to this composition?
That was not, the composition wasn't amended.
Okay.
So if it's the elections and participation,
just
like it would have to be, yeah, it would have to be amended. Like it would go to the elections and participation committee as it is. All right, so where was I? Okay, sorry, so there is a call to question. We have a second. Is there any opposition to calling the question? Okay, so in that case, we'll take a vote. So all those in favor of calling the question, please raise your placards. 13, all those opposed? 1, 2. All right, so that receives a 2/3. So the question's been called. Now we're on the motion. Is everyone okay with the wording of the motion? Okay, so all those in favor of the motion, please raise your placards for the motion as amended.
I'd like mine noted.
Okay.
And as well, please.
Me too.
5, 8, 9. All those opposed? Okay, sorry, I don't want to get this wrong. Chad, is yours up for opposition, or are you just? Are you opposing the motion?
I'm not sure if you counted twice or not.
No, but are you opposing it or are you for it?
I abstain. I'm much
We haven't gotten to the stage.
Okay, can we just redo this? Please humor me. All right, all those in favor of the motion as amended, please raise your placards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so the motion fails. 6 to 8. Yes. Oh yeah, sorry. We do have a minute keeper who doesn't know you all, so the people who wanted their yeses noted were Jared and Victoria. And Sam. And Sam.
May I also have mine?
And Samantha.
And the others.
Okay. Just a reminder, you're all on camera voting as well. Okay, so that being said, we're back to the agenda. If there's nothing further on this point. Where's my agenda gone? Is that what's next? No. Sorry, I lost my agenda. Okay, so that being said, we are in a we are at a point that is in closed session, so Rory. Okay, do we have a second? Jared, is there any opposition to entering closed? Okay, so we're in closed session. I just have to ask everyone who's not counselor, executive, myself, the minute keeper, and the judicial board, please step out. Yes. Senator. Oh, no, I'm forgetting. It's Danielle's action, sorry.
Okay, do I read the motion?
Yes.
Okay. Whereas positions adopted by council representatives do not represent the students, whereas the purpose of CSU is to represent the positions of its membership as stated in bylaw 2.1.j, be resolved that the following positions be removed from the positions book, and they're there. Do I have to read them all?
Yeah.
It's gonna take 20 minutes.
Do you want me to read them all? Because I'm gonna actually add something.
It's supposed to be on record.
Okay, you know what?
So if you can read it really fast.
I was gonna amend it to something a lot simpler.
Yeah, you don't have to, like, when you read your motion, that's when it's official, so like you don't have to be like, I move to amend the motion I sent out, like you can just mention it type thing in the, like why it's different from the document you sent out. But you don't have to move to amend your motion, because it hasn't been put on the floor
Okay,
yet.
great. So I'm going to say this again. Whereas positions adopted by council representatives do not represent the students, whereas the purpose of the CSU is to represent the positions of its membership as stated in bylaws 2.1.j, be it resolved that everything passed by council of representatives be removed from the positions book.
Okay, do you have a second? James, your motivation, Danielle?
Okay, my motivation is, okay, the positions book, I believe, does not represent the students for 4 reasons. It constrains the growth of Concordia student life, it is not regularly maintained, and it is weakly enforced. Therefore, I deem it unnecessary. The positions book does not represent the student body in terms of specifically the ones passed by the council representatives, being that even the CSU representatives are supposed to represent the student body, which is not the case due to the lack, even though people may assume that council representatives represents the student body, any student who usually runs in an election usually gets in, as you can tell in this election, 16 councillors for next year. Therefore means that these decisions made here may not actually be in the best interest of students. I deem that the positions passed by the councillors as undemocratic. Furthermore, the fact that these positions did not get passed through referendum means it does not represent the student body as a whole. The second one is that positions book right now constrains Concordia student life. Concordia clubs would get rejected in funding and creation based on these positions, which they had no say in, which therefore is there's no will for the people. Positions book are not regularly maintained, as some positions are outdated. Many positions are based on past events, especially some of them that I've put in my motion, and activities that are unnecessary for 2019 that just adds to these constraints on the student body. This also shows a lack of care towards the positions book from the councillors and executives. Therefore, they shouldn't have the power to make the decisions, as this shows the evidence of lack of interest. Also, positions are unenforceable and not necessary at the end of the day. Therefore, I believe that the positions book is not democratic and is unnecessary. Anything passed by council to the position book is undemocratic and I believe should be removed, and every position further from this should be done through referendum.
Thank you. Sophie.
Who here was elected by students?
Straw polls are highly discouraged under
Right. Sorry. But basically, my point with that is just that your jobs and my job, and our jobs collectively, is to represent the students. Representative democracy is a thing. That's how it functions. People elect their representatives to democratic bodies. I would like to strongly motivate against this position, as it removes the entire section on feminism, the entire section on Indigenous solidarity, a section that stipulates that Concordia University should provide high-quality education to its students. If, as members of the Council of Representatives, you think that those motions and those positions do not represent the interests of the CSU members, then I would like you to kindly go to your representative, the people you represent, your faculty, the students of the undergraduate Concordia Student Union, and ask whether or not they feel that the CSU should stand in solidarity with Indigenous students, whether or not the CSU should stand in solidarity with the feminist movement, and whether or not the CSU should stand in solidarity with international students who are facing mass deregulation this year, which is incredibly relevant to the 2019 context. Furthermore, I would ask that you go and you ask whether or not the students you represent would like high quality education to be provided for the tuition that they're funding. To remove entire sections that were adopted by counselors who represent students, like all of us here do, is fundamentally against the principles of representative democracy. This motion suggests that the Parliament of Canada should never pass motions that take stances on different political and social and economic decisions and should only go through referendum. And I think we can all agree, especially, I know that I've just completed my degree in political science. I know several other people have completed or are in the process of completing programs that deal with similar topics. To suggest that a representative body that is democratically elected by students should not be voting on and taking motions and adopting positions that represent the students that they are elected to represent is, I think, what is more undemocratic.
When I information,
Yes.
how many votes were cast last year?
How many, sorry?
How many votes were cast in the general elections last year? If anybody can answer, I'm confused about that. That's not. It's a relevant question. Yeah, it's not urgent.
I'd like if anyone can find it, go ahead, but I genuinely don't know. Jared?
I just wanted to mention that, look, if we want to put things through referendum as to whether or not students support it, great. But what we would risk doing is, okay, council votes on taking up these positions, then this is still council voting on a position to not have one. But that is still, by not having a position, that is in and of itself a position. So I think it would be better if we really want to look into this. We are going to have a new council, a new executive team. We can look at every single, we will have 6 months to the next by-election, so we can look at everything that council's passed and say, okay, we can put this to referendum. And then the things that get voted down by the student body at large, then we can go about taking out. But it wouldn't make sense for us to vote, oh yes, we want this position, then say, never mind, we're taking it off, then put it to referendum and say, oh, okay, we're putting it back in again. It would be better just to, okay, we put this in, and then to be sure, we ask the students, hey, you okay with this? And if they vote no, that is when we say, okay, let's remove this position. And if they vote yes, perfect, we did our job, because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to say, this is what I think the students want. And then we make it a position. And if we want to put it through referendum just to make sure we get it right, I support that. But I don't support putting in a position, because that's what our job is, put in a position that we think would support the students, then take it out because the students didn't vote it for referendum. Because then that would essentially be saying, so let's just put it to referendum. Why don't we just do that without taking it out? That's just adding extra steps. We put it in, put it to referendum to make sure we got it right, and if we didn't, then we take it out. Because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of positions that, if put to referendum, would get student support. So then we'd have to go through the process of taking everything out and then putting everything back in again. Let's just take out what the students want to take out with referendum. We don't need this extra step. This is my quote.
Thank you. Just for non-counselors, I've seen your hands go up, so I have you on the speakers list. Margot?
So
As like an anarcho-communist Jew, I'm super for direct democracy. I dig it. Also, students are cool, like, rest in peace, I'll say. Like, direct democracy is fun and good, but like, that is not actually the structure of the CSU. And our positions book provides us with lots of fun things, like institutional knowledge, so we can like have some idea of how the CSU has operated in the past, how it can operate in the future, and provide sort of a lineage of what students can expect from us, so that every year, like, we don't have an entirely, we're not like recreating the wheel every year with every new executive team and every new council like team. It's really important that students can have some sort of basis of trust with the union, and that's like what the positions book is for. And also, like, things are very specific to certain times, so we can see how we've acted in the past, so we can learn from that in our actions in the future, and that can inform our decisions. So these are like important things that are good for unions, yeah, I really advise against, saying that like your union shouldn't be for Indigenous solidarity. That's super messed up and wrong. Yeah, I really believe that positions books are really important, and this is the role that they fulfill. So it's doing its job. Let's let it do its job. Don't vote away Indigenous solidarity from the CSU. That's messed up.
Thank you. James?
Oh, right. So I think that one of the things that people are kind of forgetting is that for the past, I don't know, 10 years-ish, we've had about 3% voter turnout, almost.
Yes. Sorry, there was actually an election that happened in, I believe it was 2015 or 2014, that had higher turnout than the last general election. So that's true.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, with one exception. With one exception, right? With one exception, right? Around, let's just say 3%, maybe 5% voter turnout. That's who's voting, people in. This isn't, we finally had an election with more than 10% of the students voting for the first time since ever. Right? We can actually do this now. We can actually put these positions to, a public vote. And I think it'd be beneficial to kind of, at the very least, wipe the slate clean. Because, we have motions, we have positions in that thing that are very, very old, that are less to do with, taking a stand about student issues, but more about specific grievances that certain people had with the Quebec government during the 2012 strikes. We have this weird section that says that we want to raise the corporate tax rates, as though the CSU was an organ that advocates for raising tax rates. It's like there are so many sections in it that are just bizarre and outdated, that were basically just responses to whatever the government might have been doing at the time and never got updated. And I do believe that if the positions in the positions book, it should be confirmed by referendum. And none of these were, right? And we actually have right now the ability to, what was it? In the last election, we had 2 positions that were confirmed by referendum, and you know what? They should stay there. The second thing about this is that, none of it has any real enforcement value. And if we do try to enforce it, then we're essentially telling our student body that we don't want you to form clubs unless you agree with all of our political positions. And that, I believe, is wrong. I know that we passed a motion against that 2 councils ago, and I know a lot of people here don't believe that we should be supporting people we disagree with politically. But I do believe that we should be supporting people. As an organization, we have a duty to all students, not just students that we agree with. And I think there's
2 minutes.
Huh?
2 minutes.
Okay. So I'll finish up by saying, this kind of goes into a few policies that Sustainability Committee of all people wanted to establish as the CSU, and it's essentially saying that clubs can't do anything with any people unless they agree with all of these positions that were passed by council years ago, that were voted in by 3% of the student population. I don't think that's fair to anyone. I don't think that's fair to anyway. I don't think that's fair to the club. I don't think that's fair to the student body. I don't think we're
Okay. Let's stop that. Michaela?
So I think there's many different ways of getting feedback from students. For instance, the annual survey, which is my project this year, is a great way to have a different approach of getting student feedback. Quality higher education is why a union exists in the university. So there's certain things that I don't think we should be questioning that are part of this list. The university has a strategic plan and has hired multiple Indigenous staff to decolonize and indigenize the academy. So there's many things that I think, are pretty straightforward and shouldn't be taken out of the positions book. Maybe they should go to referendum to just keep it stronger. I very highly doubt that students are going to be against higher, better quality higher education, for instance. And I'll briefly touch on that in the presentation. A lot of students were talking specifically about that in the survey.
Alright.
Yeah, so I think the discussion is kind of poorly framed to begin with, as is kind of the motion too. So the purpose of a positions book, if I understood correctly, is basically CSU is taking a stance that's in line with students in the values and causes that they believe in. And these motions, these positions aren't really high rush, like you have to get it done this week. It's something that can probably wait until the next by-election or election. So for me, it makes sense that a position should be passed through referendum, because it's big values that we're taking that students really need to confirm. Now, chances are most of these are going to pass. Like most of these, especially like the main issues that my fellow executive mentioned, will likely pass. Like, I really hope so. But I do think that these motions should go through referendum. I think that should be where the conversation is going. I don't think like removing them makes any sense. I think it's more about passing them through referendum. The only difficulty here is it's like maybe 20 positions to pass through referendum, which is going to be difficult. But yeah, I think that's where the direction should be going in this discussion.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, so first of all, just going into the whole let's look at the intentions of the motion. Is it to, make the CSU not feminist? Is it to get rid of Indigenous solidarity? That's obviously not the intention. The intention is to it's to decide what should the positions book be. And this is a conversation worth having, and I think both sides have something to say. So, should the positions book be something that's created by something that's altered by the council, which is, in my opinion, the insiders? And I mean, how do I know that? Like, half of the people in this room are in ASFA, and they're in other things, and they're in fee levy groups, and I'm part of this. We're insiders, whether we like it or not. Should it be the book that council alters? Or should it be something that is sacred? Oh my God. God doesn't like what I have to say. But, all right. Should the book be something that the insiders touch, or should it be something that only the students touch? And if it's something that only the students touch, will that give it a greater gravity and also make people respect the positions in it a lot more? So I want to talk about how McGill went about changing the name of their sports team, which is currently the Redmen. So a lot of people found that racist because, Redmen, Native people.
Yeah, this is digressing a little.
No, there's a point to be made. The point is, people found it racist, and how did they go about changing it? How did students go about it? They did a referendum. They got a bunch of students mobilized to rise against the administration through referendum and to have their voices heard. This is what you call a bottom-up approach. It's let's go to the people first, let's educate them, and get them to stand up for something. What we tend to do at the CSU is top-down. You have the council, they decide things for the rest of the students. And it's not surprising why our turnout is usually 5%, 10%, 15%. It's because we don't really like including the people in the process. And yes, it's harder that way. It's harder to get a feminist position passed that way. It's harder to get Indigenous solidarity passed that way. But at the end of the day, it's a lot more worthwhile because now you've reached out to the community and changed their minds. So, do I think Concordia is a feminist university? No, I do not. Do I think Concordia the average student has solidarity with Indigenous people? I do not. And that is why I do not think it should be in the positions book until we fought to change the minds of our students to bring them there. So that's where I stand on this.
Thank you. Thomas?
Taking a few notes. I'm a member at large. I was involved with CSU a few years ago, and all this other stuff. I think I've probably voted on some of the positions that are in this. There's a few, so this discussion really seems to be about largely voter turnout, which is really cool. Like, yeah, increased voter turnout. The first step to me does not really seem to be to remove a bunch of positions from the positions book. I really don't see how that solves that problem. If you want to have things confirmed, then maybe run a referendum question on them rather than removing them before they can be confirmed. That just seems really confusing to me. Also, the CSU, Council of CSU's board, it's pretty standard for boards to adopt positions that a corporation is held to. Generally, the executives of a corporation are held to. A lot of boards will have a corporate register that is a record of all the motions passed by the board. The positions book is basically just a recording of what happens. If the CSU is going to be involved in advocating for students, then its decision-making body needs to make decisions on that. It really wouldn't make sense not to have that. And the positions book is a way of recording that. Yeah, this is like, I've been involved in other organizations, and even if it's not called a positions book, it's a pretty standard and like somewhat necessary process with the way boards operate. There's the idea of bringing up positions only to referendum, and I really want to speak against this because referendums are not a space for discussion. You cannot talk about the exact wording of a position. You can't have nuance. You can't easily bring in external speakers to talk to stakeholders. You put something on the table and students say yes or no. For a lot of things, this is necessary. For positions that have been talked about and like have been passed, this is super useful. But a referendum isn't a good place for democratic discussion. It's a good place for democratic decision making. And some of these positions.
We have a motion to not talk over 2 minutes.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I don't know your name. Right next to Thomas.
Gigi.
Hi.
So I'm not a student at large. I'm involved in quite a few other organizations at the MA level and ASPA. And I just want to speak, I guess, as a student voter right now because I've been a student here for quite a few years. And a lot of these positions I remember happening, and I remember what students feel about a lot of these things. And I guess I have a really big concern about why an entire positions book needs to be removed if the concern is that some of them are outdated rather than updating. And why you wouldn't want to peruse this and go through it to actually filter those things out. Because there's a lot of things in here that it shouldn't be a question that is in our positions book. Things like quality education, things like, you know, support of women and the fact that we're on unceded Indigenous lands. And I don't understand why we would get rid of all of our positions instead of going through them and then maybe bringing it to an AGM where students that you guys represent can actually discuss this and voice their opinions. Because right now it feels like you guys are doing the exact opposite of the intention. You guys are doing what you guys feel should be done and you're not representing the student body at all.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, so I want you to argue that you should vote against this motion. I'm going to give 4 main points. One, that the positions in this book have merit. Second, the scale of reform being proposed has been inadequately discussed prior to coming towards the last council meeting of the year. 3, that having positions which are passed by council and not referendum are logistically necessary for the functioning of an advocacy organization, which a union is. And the fourth one is a bit more controversial, but I will get into the nuances, which is that positions which might be unpopular are not necessarily illegitimate. So, people have already spoken to the fact that these positions have merit. We're speaking on things like quality of education. We're talking about unpaid internships, solidarity with marginalized groups. These are excellent positions. They should be things that a student union is pushing for. I'll leave that there, because others have talked about it. For a discussion about whether we should have a positions book or not, tagging that into the middle of a really long meeting, the last meeting of the year, is just not good process, and is not good democratic practice. This should be put to committees. This should be put as like just an information, purely discussion item at a council meeting, moved back to a committee, discussed, maybe comes back for a vote later. We've been really thoroughly workshopped. We've talked about repealing years worth of decision making in one vote. 3, having positions which are not referendum mandated is logistically necessary. Things come up through the year every year, and having the union, which exists to advocate for students, we can only say what we have a mandate to say. I can't just go to meeting with the administration and say whatever the hell's on my mind as my own personal views. I'm representing a constituency. Coming to council to get a mandate to say whatever position that might be, I can at least say that I'm representing somebody and having those conversations. So at least that, having that mechanism of accountability, so that we're at least make sure we have permission to be saying these things, and that there's some control of what I can say to the administrator or to the government is really important. For example, Bill 21 motion just passed last council meeting. Some of you folks even voted for it. We didn't see that coming by election time or general election time, but we now have this government law that's potentially going to strip a number of students of their right to finish their degree in education, for example. Okay, can I try the final point really quick? The final one is that if a position isn't fully supported by every student, is it legitimate? There are cases when the answer could be yes. Minority rights. Should we decide minority rights on the basis of whether it's popular enough? If student unions, labor unions, social movement groups, somebody didn't take the first stance in society to say, there's an injustice happening, we need to change our positions as a society, someone's got to take the flak first. Someone's got to push first. And so being willing to be a leader on issues has value. And we should consider that too. So we're talking about indigenous solidarity, feminism, gay rights, all that stuff, LGBTQ rights. Think about that. Taking stance on minority rights is important too.
Thank you. Danielle?
Yeah, so I appreciate everybody talking about this section. One of the big reasons I brought it here is it is a massive discussion, because I feel like the position book is, we don't talk about the fact that, you know, there's positions on there that are outdated. There are a lot of these things that are happening, and I still think that the positions that were passed by council is not democratic at the end of the day. I don't believe in that, just for the fact that, because I know personally people that have been rejected a lot of times based on specific positions and other positions that were passed by council representatives, which, you know, at that point, maybe taking it to referendum is the best place for this. Making sure that all positions go through referendum, because at the end of the day, that is where we're going to find out if the students actually believe it or not. Just like any election, they all have the opportunity to vote on it, and they can and they cannot. And we can also bring up, you can also have a, what do you call that, committee, the election committees, where not election committee, the election people. No. Anyways, the people that advocate for it and not advocate for it, you can have that too during the election.
Referendum committees.
Sure, yes, referendum committees. And therefore, at that case, that would actually get the discussion going in students, in the college. And plus, since we're in the educational sector, most people actually want to get informed about this stuff when they are voting in these elections, which is kind of cool. That being said, that makes it even more of an issue of we need to bring all positions to referendum at this case. Yeah, so, yeah, that's it.
Sorry, did you catch your name? Patrick.
Yeah, so Patrick, for those who don't know me, former VP External for the PSSA. So I don't know, I think it's a bit funny because we were just having a big, long discussion on how we needed to change the way that we conduct elections at the CSU in order to make it more representative. And now we're talking about a motion that would make the positions adopted by the CSU much more representative, and the people that are on opposite sides have completely switched roles on this topic, which makes it feel sort of rather partisan. And I think that the idea that saying that these positions should be removed until they are passed by referendum somehow means that you're against Indigenous or minority rights is kind of aside from the point. When at the end of the day, like, sure, the councillors here need to make some decisions on their own, but like, you need to represent the students. And I think that the idea that, like, also as was suggested earlier, that this conversation has only been about like online voting. I think that online voting actually provides the perfect platform to pass some of these motions, and you can do it quickly, right? Yeah, I think that's all I had to say for now. Thanks.
So there's 23 people on the speakers list. We have 4 minutes left to our scheduled council meeting. So at some point we'll probably have to vote to extend or not. Sorry, what's your name?
Milan.
Milan.
So hi, for those of you who don't know me, I'm an ASPA council member, and I'm also the incoming president of USAP. So what I want to say is that every university has a position book, and in other universities they don't go by referendums or assemblies necessarily, like the general assemblies, I mean. We were elected to be able to represent students and take decisions based on their needs, especially based on the needs of marginalized students, students from different ethnic backgrounds, low-income families, students who are not privileged. And a lot of the positions that CSU adopted helped protest. For example, when it came to sexual violence, student hikes, unpaid internships, Bill 21, etc. And yes, it does represent students because, for example, with the student hikes, the petition got so many signatures. I don't remember the exact numbers, but yes, it does represent the students' interests. And the position book is time sensitive because when you adopt a position, it empowers students to protest, it empowers students to take action, it empowers students to speak up against unfair things. And just having 20 positions being passed by a referendum is not feasible. You know, we can vote on 2 or 3 positions in a referendum, but having to tell students, well, you guys have to vote for 20 different positions and you have to read all of this it's just not doable. And at the end of the day, being part of a student committee, being part of a student association is not just about hosting events, it's also about taking political stances, taking social stances, and financial stances.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't catch your name either.
Nicola.
Nicola?
I just want to point out the fact that here we're saying that we should bring referendums so that students can vote their opinion, whereas the person who I think is a longtime ally of the person bringing the motion told me once that students don't have time and are usually uninformed, and therefore it is the CSU Council's job to be the gatekeepers of the students. So I find it very ironic that they bring about this sort of position book thing where they want to give more power to students who they know and say are usually uninformed and do not have time to make these decisions. Thank you.
Michelle?
Yeah, I think that the analysis of our system is a little bit shallow as presented in this motion. All of the decisions that are made
by counselors in these rooms are representing students. The idea that the positions book is the only thing that should represent students doesn't extend all the other decisions here makes no sense to me. I think that, like, we are elected to represent students. We have a representative democracy. We can argue about whether that is the system that we want. That's a whole different, and like a lot of people have said, complicated and deep question that the students should be making. To be clear, if I wanted a referendum, that's what I'd want it on. If we're going to overhaul our entire system, it's going to be long conversations, and sure, a referendum. But I think that people are fooling themselves if they think that the other decisions that they are making in these rooms that are not positions book decisions are not political. We are elected by people, we present political platforms, and hopefully we follow through on what we told people that we would do, but the financial decisions that are made here, the governing decisions that are made here are based on political values and are supposed to represent students just like the positions book do. So if we're going to say that the position book isn't representative of students, then we're going to say that all of the decisions here are not representative of students. So, yeah, that's it.
Could we have a
Okay, so
reading?
it's 11, sorry?
Could we have a reading of the motion when there's a second?
It's 11:30 though, so we'll have to vote to extend the meeting if we want to continue debate. Rory?
To extend the meeting by 1 hour.
Okay, do we have a second? Arad? Is there any opposition to extending it an hour? Okay, so the meeting will be extended until 12:30.
Sorry, you seconded that?
Jared. It's like I know it's from here.
It was Eduardo.
Oh,
I'm gonna be honest.
sorry, it was Eduardo, sorry.
I'm gonna be honest.
Danielle, do you mind rereading just like the be it resolved part of the motion?
Just be it resolved that everything passed by council of representatives be removed from the positions book.
Point of information.
Yes.
Just to be clear, so that everything passed by council in the current positions book is that money needed to finance the tuition fees not come from a reduction in other social services, taxes on low-income users, user fees, or an indexation of post-secondary income, that funding of universities should come from progressive taxation, and the revision of university management, that the CSU oppose the expansion of deregulated programs and call for the Quebec government to abrogate the deregulation of the concerned 6 programs of studies, that the CSU demands from Concordia University that it does not increase tuition, that the CSU demands from Concordia University that it does not increase tuition fees for international students beyond the corresponding regulated rates.
Sorry, is this a point of information?
Yeah, just so I think that it's really important that counselors know every single motion and every single position that will be removed from the book.
No, I just put you on the speakers list because that's not a point of information, sorry. Eduardo?
Can I call a question?
Yes?
Call a question.
Is there a second? Shad? Is there any opposition to calling the question? Jared? Okay, so in that case, all those in favor of calling the question, please raise your placards.
Passed by council.
It's not changing the standing regulations, and that's the only thing that requires.
Right, but we can assume that regulations passed by council in the positions book are resolutions adopted by council, therefore, to overturn them, 2/3?
No, because it's only 2/3 if it's in, wait, let me find the exact regulation.
So I have
It
it in
has
front
been
of me.
codified.
Sorry, and like it's
Yeah.
I'm against this motion, but like it is in standing right 95 that it's a regular resolution to remove from the district.
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually says it like.
That's explicit then, too.
That's not
Point of personal privilege.
Yes?
I rise to a question of privilege, and I would like to file my complaint formally in the minutes that 80% of positions that encompass everything from Indigenous solidarity to feminism to basic high-quality education is currently being voted on in closed ballot because people in this room would rather not stand by their decisions in the last meeting of the council than be accountable to the students they represent in the name of so-called democracy. And I will not sit here in the last meeting of my mandate and have my tone and my colleagues' tone be questioned when positions that have been voted on by student representatives are being called undemocratic. This is not Model UN. It is not political LARP. The decisions we make in this room matter. They affect students. Every single decision, be they a political position that you do not disagree with or a financial decision on a budget. Everything we do in this room is inherently political, and by standing by this vote and saying, I will not put my name to the decision I am making in this room, you are saying that I will not be held accountable for my actions. And that is despicable, and I would like that in the fucking minutes.
Okay, order please. But the point is taken, and it's been recorded in the minutes and the video.
Point of information.
Yes?
Hypothetically, could the next council just take all these positions and put them back in the first meeting? Hypothetically, they
Because
could?
the standing regulation that councillors can make positions has not been altered.
Okay.
The only thing that's been changed is that the positions, if passed, would be removed.
Okay.
All right, yeah, does that need to be explained? Okay, so if you vote, so your choices are yes, no, or abstain. If you vote yes, that means that you're voting for the motion that's currently on the table, which is to remove the positions from the book. If you vote no, that means you want to keep them, and if you abstain, that means you abstain.
The shade still in Model UN. It's not in Model UN.
To be fair, it just seems
Oh, Eduardo, can your pen be like a little passive?
Did anyone not get a paper or Rod?
I got it.
No. I'm trying to like hold against the democracy on both sides.
All right, folks. Okay, we're gonna take a vote. So I'd recommend doing it in silence, please.
I didn't get it.
Oh, sorry, my bad. Is anyone else up there? Sorry, I think I skipped your row.
Mine's not gonna be what you're saying.
So neither is mine. My name's on it.
But just no.
I want to know this. Thank you.
How do you spell unite? Technically, I think you should not be like.
Oh, you wrote your names together all the time.
You changed my voice.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you should make it. Yeah, you should. Thank you. Yep.
If we want, are we allowed to have our vote noted?
You can say it afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, I want mine noted after.
Yeah.
I want mine. Yeah, we can say it out loud. I am against democracy.
You know that there's no LGBT section? So
Did everyone vote?
Same, just saying.
Okay.
Is this the team?
Now that we voted against this,
yeah, let's add another one.
But there is one on bottled water, though, for sure. There is one.
Well, yeah, our plan is done.
Alright, so the minute keeper and I have counted the votes and the motion fails.
Yes!
Alright, please.
Congratulations. Yes, you won.
Alright, order please. Is there anything else to discuss on this agenda point?
Can we please have our, if we want?
Yes, yeah. Okay, so I'll just give a minute to your names to make this.
We'll put our flags
So,
up.
Victoria, Jared. Is it to be noted?
To be noted that we voted. If anyone wants their no voted or like
Or yes.
Written,
Or yes.
Yeah. Victoria, Jared.
So let's redo
What?
the vote. Let's redo
No,
the vote publicly.
No, we're just noting our no.
Yeah, if you want to note your no or yes, you can put your placard up and tell us other
Nobody reads the minutes! Other than us!
Guys, order!
Who's screaming? Are you screaming?
I am. I'm speaking at everyone.
Alright.
As long as it's not a
Alright, folks, so if there's nothing more on this. Oh, sorry. Yes, Kenny? Yes?
So, I would have to have a word before we end up this chapter, basically. There is a position on feminism in the position book, and I'm glad we're keeping it. Because in this year of the CSU that have been very fulfilling in many ways, I have never, ever experienced that many sexism in my whole life. I have been mansplained I don't know how many times. I have been not listened to, I have been denigrated, I have been pushed aside. So many people from outside have been coming to John about the campaign before me. And before anyone in my department, which are all women. The fact that this was even brought up to council, it's telling me that not only in your behavior, because the vast majority of sexism I have felt at council. I have it when I was talking in council, and that nobody was listening. The fact that this was brought up just kind of showed me, and I'm glad it didn't pass, but it shows me that not only in people's behavior, people don't want me here, but also in their position and in their ideology, people don't want me here. I'm very glad it didn't pass, and I'm very glad I can leave this mandate with this still being in the position book, but I'm honestly speechless with this happening at council. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Arad, I think you were on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we're done with this chapter, quick mandate. Whereas CSU council meetings start at 6:30 and end at 11:30 or even later, thus 5-ish hours. Whereas many CSU council meetings are tense, even referred to as toxic often, and generally an unpleasant setting to be in. Whereas students at large are disincentivized to come to CSU meetings due to these two reasons. Whereas students at large must be highly motivated to actually come to these meetings. And whereas measures should be put in place that actually incentivizes students at large to come to CSU meetings. Be it resolved that students at large speaking time be increased from 2 minutes to 5 minutes so that they don't get cut off. Be it further resolved that when students at large exhaust their 5-minute speaking time, counselors be automatically offered to vote to extend speaking time an additional 5 minutes, depending on the severity of issue at hand. Keywords.
Thank you.
Can I make a friendly amendment?
Yeah, this would have been better served in business arising. Is council amenable?
No. The reason why I'm saying this now is because people got cut off, and there's still more conversation today.
Yeah, it's because in the standing regulations, only motions that pertain to the agenda point can be considered. But business arising, that's a perfect example of business arising. So if you can just wait a little bit.
What are we at there?
I will definitely call on you when we get to point of business arising. Yeah, we're at point F, which is MSA presentation, and this one is John. So if there's nothing further on the positions book, we can move. Yes?
I just want to quickly mention something. It's going to be fast. Certain people mention that it sometimes feels like there are insiders in the CSU or related to ASPA. As the sole fine arts counselor here and the sole one re-elected, I just feel I take personal offense to the idea of I'm an insider or this is a group of insiders. I'm not part of ASPA. I'm the only fine arts person. And I just feel like if we go in with this idea that there are insiders and outsiders, that just is a threat to how we conduct ourselves. We're all supposed to be representing the students. We're not supposed to be insiders or outsiders. We are representatives. And I think by dividing us into groups, well, this is the as for groups, and this is the not as for groups, and these are the insiders and the outsiders, I just think that's going to tear down our democracy. And I just want, moving forward, that we keep that in mind.
Point of information?
Yes.
Are we just allowed to randomly speak like that, or how does that work?
Well, I said, is there anything further on the positions point? And it was something,
Mentioned
Jared
in
was
the
responding to
position.
something
Okay,
mentioned in the
cool,
point.
thank you.
I'd like us to move it along
Yeah,
though, because
thank
we have other points to mention. John.
Okay, so we're on the Muslim Students Association renovations motion now. Okay, this was going to be presented by a member of the MSA, but they couldn't make it tonight, so I'm just presenting it briefly on their behalf. They would have done a much better job, unfortunately, for me, but I'll just do my best to sort of explain what the project is. They're applying for some funding through the Student-Based Accessible Education and Legal Contingency Fund to cover two things. One is tearing out and replacing the current carpets in their prayer space. And the second point is to get some upgrades and replacements for various IT things which need to run their prayer space. So there's two quotes that were attached out into the council package. They were sent separately, unfortunately, and were sent both at the same time. They had a guy come in and look at the space and give an estimate for the carpeting costs. And they came to about $13,700, and I gave a list of the various IT items which they need, how much of them, and attached some price quotes to that as well. So combined, that comes to about 20,000 something. Is that the motion? But I'm motioning that we approve this through the Student-Based Accessible Education and Legal Contingency Fund, because that's literally what the silk funding is to do, to renovate student spaces.
Thank you. What was the exact wording of the motion? Sorry.
Oh, be it resolved that the CSU Council approve up to $21,423.27 towards costs of the renovations of the Muslim Student Association's prayer spaces, notably for new carpets and IET equipment, from the Student-Based Accessible Education and Legal Contingency Fund. This resolution shall be submitted to the next meeting of the Fund Committee for ratification.
Okay. Second, James, you kind of already motivated, so we'll go to the speakers list. Rory?
I'm just wondering, how big is the West Home first space?
It's the space is up on the 7th floor.
So that's like what, 3,000 square feet? Because I'm just looking at the floor plan for the hall buildings. The hall building, right? Or is that CSU? Floor building for the hall plan. It can't be more than, say, 5,000 square feet. 5,000 square feet would be the entire building floor print. The actual prayer space itself is probably more like 3,000 or 2,000 square feet. The going rate for carpet tile is under $3 a square foot. So I just don't understand, and I also don't like the fact that there isn't an actual estimate document in here. There's just like an email chain with a nice round convenient number. And it may be very reasonable, but without any other backup document, I don't understand how carpet for that prayer space can cost $14,000, when you round it, $14,000. Whether it's justified or not, totally separate. Just, is this a responsible use of funds? Is there a cheaper way to do it? Have multiple suppliers been asked to submit a bid? Like, with anything else the CSU buys, even if it's like only $1,000, we ask for multiple bids. We look at different companies, we provide multiple different quotes. And I know, because I've seen that be submitted as part of a check rec justification. So if we do that internally, how can we not hold a club to that same standard? I'd like to see more than one estimate for redoing the carpet in the first space.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, I would have just motioned to blanket approve this because, I mean, while Rory does bring up some valid concerns about getting multiple estimates, I think most people have read the document. The silk fund, the purpose of the silk fund is to, for renovation of student space, something to check out, and I mean, probably not the best idea to vote on stuff when I'm really tired, but that's also a consideration.
Thank you.
If anybody would like to cut the conversation short, I would support that.
Call the question.
Yeah, there's no one else on the speakers list after.
Oh,
call the question.
Oh, well, okay. There's no need for a call to question. There's no one on the speakers list. So with that, we can move to a vote if there's nothing further. So all those in favor of the motion as read by John, please raise your placards.
Requires a 2/3.
Okay, wait, sorry. Just keep your placards up, because some people kind of looked as though as I was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All those opposed? 1, 2, and that makes 12 over 14. So that does carry with 8. Yeah, 12 over 14. That does carry with 8 2/3. Is there anything further on this agenda point? Yes, Corey?
Can we just clarify that we pay this, we reimburse this 13 rand, this 13.7 when receipts are submitted, correct? Yeah. So we need a legal document showing that that's actually been paid and then a company is actually charged them that?
In this particular case, what I'd probably do is have them send us the invoice directly and we would do it. I wouldn't have them pay it.
Yeah.
And that'll give us a chance to intervene a bit and like see if there's better quotes we can get.
Okay, so if we can get better quotes then?
Yeah.
There's one around.
Okay. And when we I was on the today we presented tonight on here,
Yeah.
so I have all the information I
get it.
Thank you. Yes,
For
sir.
personal privilege, in light of this new information, can it be noted that I've changed my vote from a no to a yes?
No, you can't change the vote retroactively.
Alright, can it be noted that I just made this in the minutes, that I just said this?
It can be
Without
noted
it
in
being
minutes,
in
yeah.
vote.
That's the perils of moving to a quick vote.
Yeah.
So, Marie?
I move to mandate that 3 bids from local companies be sourced prior to any expenditure of funds.
Indeed, that 3 bids be sourced prior to
Expenditure of funds.
Okay, do we have a second? Arad, do you want to motivate?
Yeah, it's like, it's not about the amount necessarily, but it's just, we need some sort of evidence that this is a reasonable figure and that we may or may not be able to get a better price. So I think it's just responsible to do this. It's also what we do with any other expenditure that we make as a company. So, very reasonable.
Thank you. Is there any, is there any opposition to this motion?
No.
Okay, so in that case, it carries unanimously. Did you get the wording? Yeah. Okay, I can send it to you if not, but all good. Okay, so if there's nothing further on this motion, we can, yes, Shannon?
Are we in adjournment? Not adjournment, like before.
No. So we are on point G, which is survey policy and procedure. And Michaela, this one's yours.
Okay, I'll start with the motion. So whereas the Concordia Student Union represents over 35,000 students and our central role is representing and advocating for student needs, concerns, and interests. Whereas there's very limited available data on undergraduate experiences at Concordia University. Whereas an annual survey is an effective way to keep the CSU up to date on students' experiences and issues at the university. Whereas the data will be used to support CSU advocacy and projects, improve the CSU services and resources, provide evidence to the university on what changes need to be made to improve undergraduate education and campus life, and create a longitudinal data set to see how the data changes over time. Whereas the Academic and Advocacy Coordinator has implemented the first year of the annual survey, which has informed the policy to create clear responsibilities, procedure, and timelines. Be it resolved that the CSU adopt the annual undergraduate survey goals.
Great, do we have a second? Patrick, your motivation, Michaela?
Yeah, this has been one of my big year projects, and I think because we represent so many students, we really need an annual way where we're constantly keeping up to date on what students want and what they want the union to prioritize. As a CSU, we do kind of different random surveys every few years, and I think those are still important because they look at more targeted areas. But having something general where we're looking at academic experience, accessibility, discrimination, and sexual violence, these are things that we really need to keep up to date on and will really, really help our projects with the university to advocate to the university because they really want data and evidence. So I hope you got the chance to read the report. And I was going to do a presentation later, but I think maybe I could just say a few stats.
Yeah.
So altogether, there was 1,023 students who responded, which is actually quite a good pool of people in consideration that there's 35,000 students. In terms of representation, fine arts students and arts and science students were properly represented in the survey. It's a little bit too low for JMSB and Gina Cody. It's still a good cool when you look at other different surveys like the government does. But I think there really needs to be more outreach in certain areas of Gina Cody, School of Engineering and Computer Science, and JMSB, just to make it actually proportionate to the amount of students that are here. So for experience in academia, it's really interesting. So if you break it down by faculty, 71% of fine arts students say that their professors' teaching methods are almost always generally beneficial to their learning experience. This is in contrast to 30% of Gina Cody students, 42% of JMSB students, and 57% of arts and science students. There's Gina Cody students, particularly, especially in the qualitative responses, say that they really feel that their professors overall are prioritizing their research over improving their pedagogy. And so I think it's really important, and this has been shown in the link as well in the Concordian many times, that this is an issue that students are talking about and they need to take seriously. There were also specific things that I wanted to touch on that the CSU can move forward with. So for instance, giving feedback to students midway through the semester on the quality of their teaching in order for them to reevaluate and improve their pedagogical tools. This is really important because once it's the end of the semester, students feel like, why am I doing this? Will they actually do something about it? And because every classroom is also different, I think it's really important that professors can actually make some changes to improve the classroom. So for instance, on that one, 84% of students said that they would want midway evaluations for their professors instead of the end. And a breakdown from faculty is actually the most similar. It's around 85, 84, 81, 81, so they're pretty similar. And another one is providing choices of assignments. So this is something that UCAM does actually, where the prof displays the syllabus, they leave the room, then they have a discussion on how the percentages are distributed for different assignments, what the assignments are, and how many assignments there are as well. So students said that 78% of students said they'd like professors to provide students with choices of assignments. So that could be like a choice between an essay, a paper, an exam, or a presentation, just as an example. And it also gets students more engaged in the classroom and understanding their own different learning styles and how they would show that to the professor. There's a lot of data on this as well in terms of research of where students are more engaged and what's most beneficial to their learning. I think one last interesting one is that the average amount of students, there's a question on the average amount of students that spend on schoolwork outside of class time, and the most that students responded to is between 16 and 20 hours. This is outside of class time, and considering that a lot of students are also working. So I'll end on that note. There's a lot of things that from this data can become projects, and it'll be really interesting to see how things improve over time. So I strongly encourage people to vote on this motion.
Thank you. So if anyone has questions or comments, James?
Motion to call the question.
There's no one on the speakers list.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's no further speakers, I guess we can move to a vote. Okay, so all those in favor of the motion as read by Michaela, please raise your placards. 13, all those opposed? 0. Right, so that carries unanimously. Is there anything further on the survey policy and procedure?
I don't have a question. Never mind.
Okay.
Harrison.
Just that it's going to, if people are at the policy, it's going to be the next academic and advocacy coordinator, so Patrick will be working on that, and we'll be working on it together, and I'm going to give recommendations because this was the first round, and we want to make sure that questions are consistent so we can see how changes are have improved or gotten worse over time. But since it was the first trial run, we're going to just adjust a few questions.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So council-elect standing regulation changes. Sophie? This one is yours.
Cool. Wait, council-elect any relation changes?
It was what, I'm not sure if I named it correctly. It was the one you had sent me.
Was this a special council motion or the regular council motion?
It was,
Just read the latest one.
Did they change?
whatever H was.
There are two.
What's H?
I mean, just read the one you want, then that's.
So there's B and there's
There's
H.
two of them you want to present, right?
Yeah, let me just, you know what? I'm gonna read both of them and make it one motion.
Yeah, you can, or you can do it in under the same agenda point. Sorry, I tried to open H and it didn't open.
Can we just first establish what the name of the document is so that I can?
Motion to separate standing regulations.
Cool. Okay. Whereas the CSU standing regulations currently feature incoherent numbering, spelling errors, and are self-referential. Whereas the CSU requires accessible, readable, and comprehensible regulations for effectively representing its students and fulfilling its mandate. Whereas the CSU legal team put together an expansive overview of inconsistencies and references between standing regulations and bylaws. Whereas Book 5, Spaces and Services, was already repealed and replaced with the CSU policy on sexual violence in safer spaces on April 10th, 2019. Be it resolved that the CSU standing regulations are separated into 13 separate standalone policy books according to the CSU policy on policy development and review, and that all spelling errors and inconsistencies are amended. Be it further resolved that Book 1, Council of Representatives, be replaced with Policy on CSU Executives and Council of Representatives. That Book 2, Positions, Book Regulations, be replaced with Policy on Positions held by the CSU. That Book 3, Clubs, be replaced with Policy on CSU Clubs. That Book 4, Finances, be replaced with the Policy on CSU Finances and Administrative Affairs, as recommended by Policy Committee. That Book 6, Appointments, be replaced with Policy on CSU Appointments. That Book 7, Elections and Referendums, be replaced with Policy on CSU Elections and Referendums. That Book 9, Judicial Board, be replaced with Policy on CSU Judicial Board. That Book 10, Student Media, be replaced with Policy on Student Media. That Book 11, Community Action Fund, be replaced with Policy on CSU Community Action Fund. That Annex E be replaced with CSU Ethics and Sustainability Policy. That Annex B be replaced with Food Systems Project Fund Policy. And that Book 8, Final Provisions, Chapter 1, be replaced with CSU Bursary Distribution Policy.
Do you have a second? Marco, your motivation, Sophie?
As I stated in the whereases, this creates several separate policies that are easily accessible to students. We have hired a governance review assistant who has been going over and putting all of these different separate books within the standing regulations through the policy on policy development and review to make them more understandable. It creates a consistent numbering system. It replaces things that happen like standing regulation saying, as per standing regulation 231, this thing happens, and then standing regulation 231 has been replaced by another regulation. So I think this is like a nonsensical way of ensuring that we have regulations that work and that you can understand.
Thank you. James?
Right, yeah, so, I mean, a big problem that there is with this motion in particular is that the CSU bylaws make specific references to standing regulations, number one. Number two, this was never brought before Policy Committee for review. None of these motions were ever brought before Policy Committee for review. And I think that that's something that I think has to happen first before, and no documents about the governance review, right? This specific motion, I believe, and the one about the council, like, were brought forward. Now, the second issue, right, is, I think that there's a bit too much things in the standing regulations book, right? Some things should be checked, but this process wasn't open to students. This process was, kept mostly behind closed doors, and, the bylaws reference standing regulations by, like, specifically, right? So we have to have at least a book of standing regulations that encompasses the things that are referencing the bylaws. Everything else can get its own, policy section, right? Its own separate thing. But I do think that all those, but even then having them as separate entities is probably less organized than it is kind of keeping them together. And here's what I want to compare this to. At SMU, right, they have this thing called the policy book, right, where every single policy that they've ever passed is written, and it's clear, concise. It has, these hyperlinks that link you all the way down to the relevant policy, and it gives you a date, right? This policy was enacted at this date. It comes up for review on this date, right? And it's all in one place, so when you're a student, right, you're not looking through 10 different documents trying to figure out, well, I'm looking into bylaws and it says that, this election policy is written in the standing regulations, but where is it written now? Is it in the elections regulations, in the council regulations, is in the other thing? Instead of just having one place, one reference where you can look to, okay, well, this thing's connected to the bylaws and these other things aren't referenced in the bylaws, so it gets its own section, right? I think that would be a much easier thing than let's just split everything up into like a million different things. And this isn't the best way, and it should have been, this proposal should have been brought up to policy.
Thank you. Sorry, can you catch your name?
I'm a little confused. It sounded like you brought forward a motion to rename all the books. Is there any practical difference?
So the practical difference is that instead of having, right now, the standing regulations is about 78 pages. There is an index that goes through where all of the sections are supposed to be with page numbers that don't actually correspond to any pages. So this difference is that instead of having this one document that's 78 pages long and has page numbers that don't actually lead to pages that refer to things, as well as standing regulations that refer to numbers that don't actually refer to the right number, this would make it so that all of the stuff on elections is in one place. All of the regulations on the executive and the council are in another place. All of the regulations on how appointments committee functions are in a third place. So what it does is, instead of having one very long document where you have to sift through pages and pages and pages and pages, you have 10 shorter documents where you can find everything, and it's done in a very clear way through the policy on policy development and review, like in that format. And can I, in this sort of answer, address something that was mentioned?
I have you on the speakers list, like, almost next. So.
Then I'll wait till my speakers list does that answer your question?
So, just to confirm, you're basically saying add a level of hyperlink and smaller web pages?
Yeah, I'm basically saying instead of having like one big document that doesn't actually link to anything properly, having smaller documents that link properly.
Just a quick yes or no question. With the exception of the way the formatting of the CSU website, does this actually make a difference?
The only except for it makes a difference because instead of one document you have several.
Other than that?
No.
Redistribution of content, that's what it is. Alright, let's move on.
Okay, thank you. Jared?
I just want to, can I make a motion to extend, because I don't think we're going to, in less than 30 minutes, do everything.
There's still 20 minutes. Can we try? Please.
We can try.
We can try. Yeah.
Okay.
If you need to do the motion, it'll be in 20 minutes, so.
All right.
Sophie?
Yeah, so the standing regulations are mentioned in the bylaws. Can I motion to amend be it further resolved that the applicable new separated policy books will be amended to the bylaws and passed in referendum in October 2019?
Can you just write it down?
Yeah.
Me? And me. Yeah, oh, and the me. Do we have a second? Jared, do you want to motivate Sophie?
Yeah, it's valid. Standing regulations are mentioned. They aren't specifically mentioned. No specific number of regulation is mentioned within the bylaws. So this just means that instead of in the election section it's saying please refer to the standing regulations, it will say refer to the policy on elections and referendums.
Is there any opposition to the amendment to just add that be it further resolved on the bottom that says it has to pass through referendum and so forth and so forth? Okay, so in that case, the amendment can be considered friendly, and we move on to the speakers list to Michaela.
Yeah, just to mention as the chair of policy, this is a project that I've been in conversation with Sophie for over the course of the year, and although these books were not passed directly through policy, nothing is really changing at all except for spelling errors and grammar. And updating things that should have been updated a really, really long time ago. So no actually content has changed at all. And also we recently, before all of this happened, passed at policy the policy on policy development and review, which talks about standardizing and reformatting all of the policies. So this actually aligns with what was passed at policy.
Thank you. James.
If you talk to almost any lawyer, they will tell you that punctuation is very key. And now my biggest concern right now is that we don't have, yeah, we're gonna say, let's just fix all the spelling errors, let's just fix all the numbering. Well, we don't have that as a physical form. I don't feel comfortable approving something when I don't have them, right, as finished documents right in front of me, right? Like we don't have, I've never seen what the new elections policy is gonna be, right? We can speak all the time about, oh, let's just gather everything, but how does this look like? How does this operate? What's gonna be in it? There's, a good idea about, maybe trying to change the bylaws, but just saying, well, let's just change the bylaws to do a thing, that motion, I believe, gets nullified the moment we get out of our mandate, because I believe that we have to, within our mandate, I believe in the bylaws to do a bylaw change, right? So instead we're putting on the onus on the future council to pass the same motion, and anyway, I would have liked to see at least the prepared positions, because then we have something to look at, right? Okay, what were not necessarily what were the spelling changes, but at least to see, okay, we have this book here, we've gathered all this other thing, and we've presumably spent time with an expert, right? But I would have liked to see a document, at the very least at policy committee, so that somebody could have at least reviewed all these different books that we have now, instead of having one book, having multiple books. I still think that we should probably keep everything that's referenced in the bylaws as a rump standing regs, right? Just keep it only that, right? And then separate out everything else. I think that'd be much better for just continuity of the union. You don't need to worry about bylaw changes that way. But I would still like to see something that's physical before I vote on it. I don't like voting on these virtual policies that exist
it's at 2 minutes.
That exist in principle.
Okay, the correct answer to it's 2 minutes is not to continue talking. It's either thank you and say the last word, or just do like Thomas did. Michaela. You were next on the speaker's list. Oh, sorry, Patrick Quinn.
I guess I call the question.
Okay, do we have a second calling the question? John? Is there any opposition to calling the question?
No.
Okay, so in that case, all those in favor of the motion as read by Sophie, please raise your placards. 9, all those opposed? 1. Eduardo, is your placard up? No, okay. Okay, so in that case, 9-1, so the motion carries. Yes, Michelle?
Just a point of parliamentary inquiry. If there's a vote and somebody does not vote at all, is that unanimous?
It's an abstention. Sorry.
Right, so if there's, say, out of 20 votes, 19 votes and one person who doesn't vote, so an abstention?
Yeah. The vote is out of 19.
And, right,
Okay,
so that's
so it's
unanimous?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Perfect. Now we are on agenda point number I. Oh no, sorry, you had another motion under this one, Sophie.
Okay. So I just need to pull up the agenda again.
I might have given it the wrong number, but it is there.
Yes. Whereas Special Bylaw J requires external committee members to be appointed for 3-year terms, whereas Jason Prince has served 3 years on the Fund Committee as one of 2 external members, be it resolved that Jason Prince is appointed to the Silk Fund Committee for a consecutive 3-year term to end on May 31st, 2022.
I think that was point I.
Yes, it's a separate agenda point, but it's fine.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There was no written motion sent out for the other one. It was just proposed standing regulation changes.
That was okay. That was the one that we just did, was the governance review.
Yes.
And then this is I.
Yes.
Yes?
All good. Yes.
Yes.
Just point of inquiry, what
Yes.
happened to the council elect motion?
The council elect motion, I accidentally said K instead of H, so now H is K.
Okay. Are
Is
we
that
okay if we still do it in this order and then I go to the council elect?
Yes,
That's
yes,
fine.
we are good.
Okay.
Basically, H became K and K became H. Sorry for that.
fantastic resource. He is a professor at Concordia. It's one of the 2 external members who can be hired and part of the Concordia University payroll. So Jason has been around since the beginning of Silk, pretty much. Really great. They're knowledgeable on a lot of things and past precedents that new people might not be, and I think that they're an excellent addition to the Silk Fund and really care about protecting it and students' money, so I think that would be great for them to have another 3-year term.
Thank you. Is there any, yes, Jeff?
Call the question?
Oh, there's no one on the speakers list. So if there's no further comments or questions, all those in favor of appointing Jason Prince, please raise your placards. 11, all those opposed? 0. All right, so that carries unanimously. If there's nothing further on the Silk Fund Committee appointment, we're on Finance and Operations Policy. And John, this one is yours.
Sorry, that was the council left.
So we could pass that through my motion.
There's a motion to repeal book 4 of the CSU standing regulations and approve the proposed changes.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Is that?
Okay, so we're on Finance and Operations Policy. Or we're at?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, cool.
Motion to repeal.
Okay, so the Finance Committee every year, the standing regulations requires that the Finance Committee review the finance policy, make recommendations, make changes. So the Finance Committee has done that. But where we are, we're creating this new formatting template for CSU policy regulations moving forward. I thought that moving in the start of the year, this may be a good time to actually make the finance sections and regulations coherent, readable, and just containing information that is operationally true of the CSU, but has been scattered across multiple council motions across a long period, and not actually in the regulations as it needs to be reconciled with a bunch of other things. So I spent a long time writing this, and came up with this policy. We passed it through the Finance Committee, but we can't just pass it through consent agenda. That's something I want to discuss here. Most of what's here is what was already in the standing regulations, but worded differently so you can actually understand it. So you try to read specifically the finance section of the old standing regs. There's a section around approval authorities, about who has the authority to grant what in what cases. So sometimes, most of the time, the finance coordinator alone authorizes an expense. Sometimes you need the finance coordinator plus another executive who oversees their department. Sometimes you also need the staff manager or service center doing the HOJO or advocacy. Sometimes it's other people like the chair of the judicial board or the CEO of election stuff. But the way it was worded, it bounced you back and forth through different sections of the standing regulations. Different standing regulations, which should have all been in one section, were scattered throughout multiple sections. And again, some things were just missing, and some things just needed some tweaks. So some examples of things that were operationally true and ratified by council resolution, but not in the regulations, would be things like executive pay. It would be things like credit card policy. And these are the things which I've added into the new finance policy, so it's all in one place, so you can see it. And it's easy to amend, easy to understand. So even if you don't have a lot of experience reading, you actually know how the CSU's financial processes works, who can approve what, when you can approve it, and how. That's basically the gist. We only made some things that are actually genuinely new to the policy would be adding a section around investments, which states that there were some investment policies already, but it clarifies again who can do what and when. I made some additions for reimbursements, so that like when an executive or staff person goes to a conference, how much can they actually spend per day on meals? How much you can get for mileage? We've had what we've done in practice, but we've never anything in writing. So it says you're entitled to this much in this case. We've added things such as how we want to do honorarium. We have a policy around petty cash and cash flows, so that so currently we operate with no operational practice. So we could take out cash and lend it out, but there's no real policy governing it. So having something in writing now is something new. I've amended the reporting and transparency section to include new requirements. So notably, section 15.3, it used to be say that councillors shall be allowed to exercise their legal rights to consult the financial books of the union within 3 days of making a request. I've expanded to also include student media. So student media that request to see the transactions the CSU the CSU said it was required to provide that info to the media within 3 days. They asked. As well as the operating budget and revised budgets must be posted on the website within 1 week of their being passed. This has not been practiced in the CSU historically. They've ultimately been audited financial statements that get posted, so I just want to add extra transparency so we can get the budget go online. The health and dental plan stuff, none of this is actually new policy. It's already been there in practice, just putting it in writing there so it's actually people know what it is. You can just read the policy and actually learn things what your job is. That's basically the gist here. If there's amendments or ideas that would be added to it, I'm quite open to that. It's, I think it's ready to be passed, but it's, if we want to have a little bit of time talking about it, it's not the most urgent thing, although it should be done early in June because setting the policy at the start of June will influence the entirety of the year. So I am happy to see the new policies. I think it's setting the next team up on a really good footing, but it's, of course, all policies are always a work in progress, so if there's amendments or suggestions, I welcome them.
Shad, is your placard up or you just?
I call the question.
Okay, just call the question after one speaker. James?
Right. I would just like to, I mean, I'm not going to stand up and vote down the entire motion on this point, but I'd just like to, before the vote happens, I'd just like to make this point clear. I do believe that I don't think the CSU should be keeping individual bank account, like internal bank accounts for clubs. They should operate like almost literally every other university in the country, where clubs are required to have their own actual bank accounts and provide bank statements in order to get refunds, right? Instead of just random receipts, and that they have to use their own debit card from their bank account in order to make all purchases. That's my personal stance on clubs. I don't think this is. I mean, there are a bunch of other good stuff that's going into that policy, so I don't think it's enough to, I'm not going to try and kill it. But I do want to make that point that, just raise that objection, and I want to have that objection noted before we proceed.
Jeff?
Call the question.
There's no one on this list. But there's no motion either on the table, sorry.
Right. I move. Okay. I move that this CSU finance policy shall be as follows.
Okay. Do you have a second? Jared, you're already kind of motivated. Rory, or you were kind of something?
I'm waiting to vote.
Oh, okay.
Second it?
Jared. All right. So if there's no further discussion on the motion at hand, we can move to a vote. So all those in favor of approving, please raise your placards. 10. All those opposed? 0. Right. So that carries. And if there's nothing further on the financial operations and policy, we're at governance review, which is now the not governance review, the council-elect thing. Sophie?
Okay.
Oh, yes, there's 2 seconds. Here you go.
Okay. Be it resolved that Regulation 7 gives appointment committee the option to interview and recommend a chairperson and minute keeper candidates to council. That Regulation 10, all candidates for positions are given the option to present themselves to council and may be nominated from the floor. To avoid the unnecessary interviews of all candidates and from the entire council, through which we've received several complaints throughout this mandate. Be it further resolved that Regulation 33 creates a council orientation before any business-related meetings, and that Regulation 34 places the meeting of council-elect on the 4th Wednesday of May rather than the 3rd to take place 1 week after council orientation. Yeah.
Alright, do you have a second? Jeff, you want to vote it, Sophie?
Yeah, basically, we received many candidates about the interviews that took place
in front of council this year. Like, I don't think that was a surprise. I received so many, whether it was a CEO, the chairperson, the minute keeper. We received a candidate for just about any council-wide interview. This provides the opportunity for appointments committee to meet, form, and recommend to council, so that it takes away a level of stress, so that 30 people aren't interviewing you, only like 5 people are. And even then, that's like a really big hiring panel. Also, for orientation to happen before any business-related meetings, it gives a time for team building between new executives and incoming counselors, as well as like community standards, Robert's Rules of Order, so that new counselors don't feel completely overwhelmed. I know council-elect can be really, really daunting, having gone through it myself without getting to have a council-elect, being elected in a by-election. I'm sure many in this room can relate, so yourself included. So this provides an opportunity to really learn the rules of the game and not feel so overwhelmed, and then the important business decision making can happen a week later. We did 2 meetings for our council-elect, and I think that this would really provide a good opportunity to do a kind of community dry run.
Thank you. James.
Right. So I think that we're forgetting how lucky we were as council. That the first Wednesday of May fell, I think, on the 2nd last year. It's falling on the 1st this year, meaning that next week would be the 3rd Wednesday of May. I think we're forgetting how lucky we were, right? That we were able to, because we have 5 Wednesdays in the month of May, have a special council meeting where we finished all of the appointments, right? I think we forget how lucky we were for that circumstance. And next year, right, that won't be an option, right, if we pass this motion. It's going to be the last thing in May. And the reason we had a special meeting is because we weren't able to fill all the positions, because appointments takes a long time. Appointments takes a very long time, especially if you need to fill every single position. And we chose not to have meetings until like 4 a.m., right? And I think pushing council meetings until the last, in the majority of months, right, in the majority of years, the last Wednesday of May before they begin their next mandate in June, is going to leave committees without members. It's going to force council essentially to stay up until 4 a.m. every single year, and I don't think that's something that's going to benefit anyone. And this entire, I mean, we used to, like, there's already something that can be used as a council orientation that we didn't use this year, that I was advocating for, that I was begging for like almost the entire summer, and then even afterwards, there's the council retreat. And usually the council retreat's supposed to be used for the state retreat.
Yeah, this is kind of digressing into it.
Well, no, because we're talking about the council retreat. I'm saying this event is supposed to be used for council retreat. It's why it exists. It's supposed to be used for team building. It's supposed to be used for a bunch of like stuff like introducing people to the CSU. And just because last year we weren't able to hold it doesn't mean that in principle, right? That's what this meeting's supposed to be. Council-elect is, you know, by holding it on the 4th Wednesday of May.
It's 12:30. Are we going to continue this meeting or not?
Yeah, we have to vote whether or not we're going to continue it. So, yeah, at this point we need to continue. And how long? Jad?
Motion to. Also, I have to do the.
Well, I thought that's what you were
Yeah, yeah, motion to like extend the meeting and then motion to pass, or can it be the other way?
Like, just how much time do you want to?
Okay, motion to extend this for another 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then let's include the motion to pass Sophie's revisal. Let's say.
Oh, you can't combine them. Like, you have to, like, there's still.
So motion, yeah, let's vote, yeah.
Okay, I need a second for extending 15 minutes.
Okay.
Do you need to go around to see if we still have quorum?
Yeah, I can. And is there any opposition to extending 15 minutes? I'll just do a quorum count as well. So 1, 2.
I can't say, that's why
Okay.
I go for a vote today, yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, we're fine.
9?
Yeah, we have at least 9.
We're fine by 1.
I mean, it's quorum's a yes or no. It's like
Yeah,
you're pregnant.
okay, so like no one else is leaving. Let's
Okay,
Alright, motion to extend this by 15 minutes.
Okay, is there any opposition to extending by 15 minutes?
No.
Okay.
If we're standing here, no.
Sorry.
If you're opposed, leave.
Well, if there's no quorum, there's no quorum. If there is quorum, there is quorum. But currently, as it stands, we have 15 more minutes.
Where's she going?
Sophie?
No, she-
Okay, Sophie, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to state that this would not preclude a council retreat from occurring, which we did have, granted late in the year, once the new councillors were elected during after by-elections. This would simply provide a groundwork before appointments take place. Appointments are a tedious process, but what actually took the most time during council-elect was simply nominating a chair and minute keeper. This motion provides appointments committee the power to do so and takes that conversation out of council, so it's less arduous. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Motion to pass Sophie's revisal.
You can't move to pass a motion. Like,
What can I do then?
there's
Motion to
call
vote
the
on
question.
voting?
So
Yeah.
I'll call the question.
Okay, is there a second for calling the question? Kemi, is there any opposition to calling the question?
No.
Okay, so all those in favor of the motion as read by Sophie, please raise your placards. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed? 1. All right, so that carries, and the rest are abstentions. Okay. We did Woodnote housing co-op. Yeah. Okay, so that's all good. And then there was sustainability document, and James, you had pulled these from the consent agenda.
Yes. I think that a few things are very, very wrong with this. The things that happened in this consent agenda is that Sustainability Committee tried to pass a $1.2 million expense under our nose in consent agenda.
Well, actually, it should be pulled out and then voted. Like, it's actually in the standing regulations, like council has to approve it.
Yeah, but they tried to pass it in consent agenda. Instead of-
Yeah, that's yeah. Also, that's like a lot of
Alright.
conjecture right
But
there.
it's there was a 1.2, like I pulled it out because of a few reasons. There was a $1.2 million expense that was attempted to be passed just in the consent agenda that requires a 2/3 vote of council. And there were two documents that I found very problematic, and it's related to the purchasing guide. And I have a few people here that have waited to talk about the purchasing guide. Those are the two reasons that I pulled it out. The third reason is that in the report, the sustainability coordinator treated the motions for the purchase policy to be as if it was already passed. And I mean that's a minor complaint, but that's just a complaint as if it was already passed without it actually being passed in council. And I mean the problem with the purchasing guide is it effectively would defund both Hillel and Israel on campus. If this was ever, this is essentially defunding these two groups by proxy, and I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to politicize every purchase that every club makes by forcing them to adhere to political positions. Anyway, I'd like to give the floor to anybody else that wishes to speak. Hopefully the two students at large that have waited this entire time. Thanks for waiting.
As well, just so we're not blaming Kira for things they didn't do, like I put the documents in consent agenda and then it's council's due diligence if there's anything to pull them out, but like reports and everything, we automatically put them there. So
Okay,
it's not like
well then-
Kira was trying to hide things by putting them there. That was me, as per procedure. Camille?
Motion to approve sustainability document.
Okay, do we have a second?
Yeah.
Jad, you wanna motivate?
You don't need to.
No. I think Akira is doing an amazing job, to be honest.
Okay. The motion was just to approve them, because eventually, like, there needs to be a motion on the, there needs to be a motion on the table. Rory?
My only concern with this is in the situation where you can't find a supplier that is okay for a certain price, or maybe like the only approved suppliers are like, let's say arbitrarily 75% more expensive than the other existing, like the status quo option. I think there should be some sort of exception avenue. Maybe there is. Is there an exception avenue?
Yeah, you get 3
Yeah.
times.
So I'm just gonna
Yeah, please,
Press this all down.
please do.
One, it was put in the consent agenda, I was gonna pull it out, you pulled it out before me. Two, the question about greenhouse is supposed to go to referendum, so I'm not trying to pass anything, slide. Three, supplier's guide already exists in the standing regulations, so I'm not trying to pass something that hasn't been passed. It exists in the standing regulations, but it's nowhere to be found, so I recreated it. Three, the BDS guide is due to our positions on BDS.
And for the question he asked.
And I'm there. So at the very end of the supplier's guide, the issue with the suppliers list is that I do not have all the time in the world to go after every company and see if they follow our rules under Annex E. So I did my best. The suppliers guide right now is like 3 months of work of like pursuing companies, asking them to fulfill, like fill out the form, tell me if they comply to our Annex E, yes, no, okay, you've been added to the list. At the end of the suppliers list, there is a form. If you want to add something that falls under our regulations and our positions, then you fill out the form, it gets sent to the sustainability coordinator, then it gets sent to the sustainability committee, they do the research, they get into contact with the company, it gets approved, it gets added to the list. So the suppliers list is not, it's not a concrete form. It's an ongoing form that people are supposed to add to when they find more suppliers. So if you do have like somebody that you want to add, it's not that you can't buy from them. It just has to get approved because we have positions that we have to follow, we have things in standing regulations that we have to abide by, and we haven't been buying them for years because we haven't had a suppliers list.
Thank you. Yes.
So, sorry, point of I hate to call it privilege here, but I let myself be interrupted because my question was going to be answered, but my question hasn't been answered.
Oh, sorry, go
So
ahead.
if I could maybe
Yeah.
rephrase that. It's not necessarily a concern about not being able to add new suppliers to the list, because that I get. It's in the documents, I can see the form to add new suppliers. But in a situation where, let's say, a club is trying to source resources, and, for example, Dollarama is a no-go, maybe the next place that they can get their supplies from is going to be 3 times more expensive. And then for those reasons, they can't afford it. There's got to be an exception mechanism other than just, I want to add Dollarama to the supplier list. If there is, and my question is specifically, what is that like one-time exception for a situation procedure like?
If your club has to go to Dollarama to buy something, I think there's like a 3
So if you read the minutes of the committee meeting discussing the suppliers list, you would see that there's a 3-time rule about going somewhere that you're not supposed to on the list until you find a new supplier that is reasonable for what you're trying to resource. So you have 3 chances, like if you get something that's like against the suppliers list or against our BDS policy, like you fill out the form saying this is the reason we got it, it was a last minute event, or we couldn't find a better place within our budget, blah, 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 these are the reasons for it. It goes to finance, it goes to sustainability, we approve the reason, we give a warning, we like, this is what you're gonna have to take care of, come back, and you have like 3 chances basically of doing this until you find a supplier or you use the supplier that's on the list.
And that's in the policy right now?
Pardon me? Yeah.
That's in the policy right now?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, I will start by saying it's possible I will take this a little bit emotionally, because when I was 6 weeks old, a group of Palestinians tried to murder me by throwing stones because they said, hey, that's a soft target. No, literally, that is the thing. And there was a group of Israeli soldiers armed to the teeth standing nearby, and they did not do anything to intervene. And their solution was like, guys, if you want your baby to live, you know, get into your car and get out of this area. And my father was shocked, and he was like, guys, like, you're standing there with machine guns. How are they not scared to murder a baby in front of you? And their answer was, we're sorry, it takes us 2 days to get approval. For this reason, I do have strong, very, very strong views on BDS things. But that being said, it is true that there is a policy in the book which says that we, living in Canada, living away from the danger, not understanding what it means to have 10 seconds to run to shelter when a missile is coming at you, not understanding what it means when your government says, we are not going to defend you from your children being murdered because we are scared of what the international community will say. Not understanding all this, we have decided to put forward a policy that says we support discrimination against Israelis. Now, this is a policy, nothing we can do about it. With that being said, the decision to enforce this policy is something which you cannot claim yourself a representative of me, and quite frankly, I believe at this point it is only fair to say that whereas 80% of the students do not vote and view the CSU as just leave us alone, the CSU should not be forcing this discriminatory policy and essentially telling many students that not only do we not represent you, but we represent the opposite of what you believe in. We represent, well, we basically don't represent you, and we are going to try to do everything to make that clear.
Thank you. James?
Well heard. So, I was going to say that this kind of two-step policy puts a very big burden on clubs. Right? Puts a very, very big burden on clubs. Especially because the CSU just kind of, well, we're not going to look into, all the suppliers. Now, clubs who are notorious in, trying to get responses from the CSU and having this difficult relationship, adding this extra layer of bureaucracy between clubs and trying to get their funding approved, I think puts an undue burden on the clubs themselves and needlessly politicizes club spending by essentially saying, well, if you don't find a company that we agree with politically, then, you can do it twice, you can do it 3 times, but after that, it's three attempts, 3 strikes, 3 tries to get it right. And then, we're not refunding you, we're not funding your events. This is essentially, Concordia, despite, the history with, the conflict between, Concordia did try, the CSU did try to defund Hillel at one point, and it didn't work. But despite this, this difference on campus, continued to use, fund these groups. And now we're saying we don't want to fund them because it's, because we don't like them politically. And I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong to not fund people and to put extra barriers, ideological barriers on spending if we don't like an approved club's politics. And I think that's just wrong.
Thank you. Okay, so it's 12:45. We have to motion if we want to continue the meeting. Yes, Sophie?
I motion to continue the meeting 15 minutes.
Okay, do we have a second?
Sure.
Kemi, is everyone amenable to 15 minutes?
Yeah, I call for the orders of the day.
There's actually a motion on the table.
So what is the motion and what is
it's
after
to approve the documents and then
what's after the motion? Is
return
that
the 15 business arising and that stuff.
which is nothing.
It's a Rad's
Other
motion.
than
Yes.
okay, so this and then that.
Yes.
Then we're done?
Yes.
Okay. 15, let's go.
Okay. Yes.
I guess I start. I'm John Howard, and I'll excuse for a slow speaking and probably stuttering, as you might hear. I guess I'll start by saying this I'm scared. I'm scared. Seeing this PBS motion on the table, I've seen CSU recently taking a really good and right step to oppose Bill 21, which discriminates against people, which tells certain people that they aren't welcome here, that their ideas and that their beliefs aren't welcome. And I also remember during the initial vote for putting the BDS motion in the Constitution, and I was scared to come to Concordia, and I avoided coming to Concordia because of the pressure I felt not from the administration, but from my fellow students. And it also is why, even though I'm wearing a kippah right now in this room, why during my regular studies I often don't wear it, and I find it bizarre that it is considered okay to discriminate against one group of students because it is considered either politically correct or okay for whatever reason, and then at the same motion, but we want to oppose this other thing because it's discriminatory. And I guess, like my peer Hirsch said, I don't feel represented by the student union, and I don't really entirely feel that safe either. That's why even at times I who I am, because I don't feel safe, and this motion just reinforces that fear, and I hope that is considered by those present here. Thank you.
Thank you. Paige?
Okay, I just wanted to address the 3 strikes form that we have in this motion. Basically, the form is for like student associations who need to like rush to put on an event or rush to do something and then have to go to like the dollar store to get cups for people to drink or whatever, and that's not like a sustainable purchase. So the way it sort of came up is that like student associations that are dealing heavily with sexual assault in their department, like it's been hard to like figure out how to like address these things, how to disseminate information to students, and so there's been a lot of like issues where like where a last minute thing has to be called, like an AGM or something to like review like a climate review that was like released in the English department, stuff like that. And I'm on case, so that's like what I can speak to, but I'm sure there's lots of other situations where students have had to make purchases that are not like in line with like the positions book and in line with the sustainability policies. And so it's just sort of, it's not so that student associations can just like spend 3 times at like recklessly at whatever like place they need to spend like just for no reason. It's for like people who like have reasonable cause to be using something that's not sustainable. It's to alleviate the burden of student associations that are like working beyond the mandate of being on a student association, beyond having to claim wine and cheeses and those kind of things. So I just wanted to put that up there, clarify that.
Thank you. Arad?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say this is an extremely touchy subject because it comes back down to the Israelo-Palestinian conflict. It's been going on for years. Like, I don't mean 10 years. I mean years. And this motion, the reason why this motion is so contentious is because many of our Jewish students at large and colleagues don't feel safe or they feel unrepresented. Maybe that's the right word. As voiced previously by. Sorry?
They are here. We can ask them.
Yes.
But as I was about to say, as they explicitly voiced out, I'm just paraphrasing what they said. Anyways, my point being, we should definitely take this into consideration. I mean, we can't just silence this and just move on. Period. I mean, seriously think this through.
John?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. Hearing about how we have plans to defund Hillel from one of the counselors, like that's news to me. Please keep your denunciations to things that are based in reality. That's a humble request, okay? We funded Hillel and Israel on Campus, which is a politically Zionist group, not just a Jewish student club. We're doing thousands of dollars in the budget this year. And I see no reason why that wouldn't continue. This is like, is that the question? Yes.
Do you mind reading out the text of the requirement?
Aren't we talking about sustainability and a motion to pass?
Yeah, well, some of this is in the document.
It is. It is.
Maybe put that in
Things like
There
this.
is, there's 7 minutes left.
So, there's been, the referendum on BDS was passed in, was 2014?
Yeah.
So, that's been in place since then. In all of this period, we've had a referendum mandated BDS policy. Hillel and Israel on campus have gotten funding and we continue to do so. For, I guess, a lot of reasons. If no other reason, we can notwithstand and recognize that there is still a lot of divergent opinions on campus, and we can respect that. So I would, as both the finance coordinator and acting internal coordinator for the CSU Red House League, if folks in your club are thinking that funding is going to be cut, that's not going to happen. That's like extraordinarily unlikely. It's never happened.
That is only part of the concerns.
I know. It's just one of the things I want to talk about. Obviously, this is a very charged issue because people have a lot of pain and trauma associated with it, especially when you have personal stake in it. There's very divergent views within the Jewish community. There's lots of stories you can hear if you talk to Palestinians, and again, divergent opinions within that community as well. A decision that will make everybody happy is probably not going to happen, and it's complicated because we have our arms tied with this BDS referendum mandated policy, not just a council motion. So how to actually apply that is a question, because at what point are you saying, you could say, when I was doing some work this week to look into, say, investments we have in the Silk Fund, if we apply that policy, does it mean we'll just make a point of not funding settlements or military things? We're going to go super broad and talk about anything that's a computer, which, guess what? It's violates BDS policy. So at some point, you have to draw a line. Where that line should be drawn is not always clear.
Going on.
I tend to be, like, speaking of my personal style as finance coordinator, when I do the check recs every week, I tend to be a bit more forgiving for clubs than I would for internal CSU departments in terms of applying sustainability and other positions policies. Like, you can do the club's education, orientation, all that stuff, and you're still going to get the odd Airbnb here and there. And I don't want to be tyrannical with these policies, because also leaving students, with lots of money out and not going to get reimbursed is also a form of injustice. So, like, you always have to use discretion on a weekly basis to see if, like, do I be really hard with the policy, or do I exercise some restraint? I don't know. But, trying to make a policy ethical is a good goal.
Thank you. Eduardo?
Just to cut back to the greenhouse for a moment, because from the last council meeting we attended, obviously the greenhouse presented, we weren't sure how to approach the issue. If Kira could just explain why they got to the $1.2 million mark on the Silk Fund, just a bit.
Yeah, so like amongst other committee members, we were talking about it, and we knew that it's not an amount that we can actually truly approve. It has to be sent to referendum. However, it is a renovation that we as a CSU think we should be supporting. And just based off like the budget they provided, it was like the only way to cut it up was like to pay for the labor cost of the renovations portion, and then the rest that we thought was more like costs that they could get from other sources of funding we cut out. So this is just kind of like, the idea is that this is what we're presenting them, showing them that we have their support in terms of like, we understand that the greenhouse needs to be renovated, and it's an important aspect of like Concordia, and it's the sustainability practices and all of that jazz. And then the number just has to do with like the budget they provided us, and that like the only way to cut it down was like either pay all their labor costs or like pay nothing. And I don't think that like the saying like zero would show any support from the CSU and like helping them get the funding they needed to. So I don't know if anyone else on the committee wants to add to that.
Thank you. Chad?
Well, for the 1.2 million, we did ask for 2.1. You were there for council and they came to present, so we just figured like a good thing would be to pay like half, and then Concordia would pay the other half. But in reality, the district should pay for the whole thing. I don't know if we agreed to like pay the labor or just the actual cost of the material. But anyway, you get the point. Like we can't anyway give them 1.2. We can give them like whatever max we have, and the rest goes to us random. And then when it goes to the sustainability thing, like I do understand the concerns that some people have brought up here. I understand how it's a touchy subject. Nonetheless, like we're here to present some like massive like numbers of students, and this referendum was passed in 2014, and we are like binding to it. So we're not saying we're going to be defunding any clubs. This is literally like the purchase guide. So it just means that you will be reimbursed if you try to, not even like, you're not even mandated to do, you just try, you get 3 times. You try to use this purchase guide as the guide that you would use to buy whatever material you need for an event, whether that's food or whatever, and that's it. We're not saying we're going to defund Israeli clubs, we're not saying we're going to defund Jewish voices, we're not saying we're going to do this, this, and that, because there are diverging opinions like John mentioned earlier, and the referendum does represent the student body. It was passed. What I can give you as a recommendation, if you don't feel like you're represented, run for council, find someone that does, vote for them, or get 750 signatures, get a referendum to council, get a motion passed to council, and then turn it into a referendum if you strongly believe that this specific thing that's in our position book needs to be removed, if you think it's outdated or whatever it is. But just to like make sure you guys understand that this is we're not defunding, it's not action oriented, it's literally like a reimbursement processes. It's like if your receipt comes from these places, ideally, then you would get reimbursed, and if not, not just because of BDS, but also for sustainability, they have to be in accordance with like so many other things in terms of where it's made, how the money's spent of that organization, whether they like kill turtles in the Pacific Ocean or not, like things like that, not just BDS. And I'm pretty sure like that specific policy is going to be quite loose, as I imagine it brings a lot of trouble. And again, if you want to do something about it, you should just go and just get 750 signatures and then turn it into a referendum. Can I call the question?
Not after that. We're at the 15-minute mark again, so yes, Kemi?
Can I call the question?
I'm next. Yes, you are actually next.
Call the question.
Yeah, because we're not actually at.
Can I call the question?
Yeah, do we have a second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, is there any opposition to calling the question? Okay, so this is the approval of the sustainability documents. All those in favor of approving, please raise your placards. 1, 2. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and any abstentions? 2, sorry. Okay. 3, sorry. Okay, so the sustainability documents are not approved.
Okay.
So, yeah, Rory?
Can I move to extend council by 3 minutes for the sole purpose of covering Arad's motion?
Okay.
Which is what?
What is the resolution?
It was just about students at large speaking.
Point of information?
Yes?
Does this mean that like Akira's final report and everything isn't approved?
That was what that was what the motion was.
Well, we can't have that. So what does that mean for Akira's documents?
It's just not, her report's just not approved then.
So that means
But it has to get approved.
Yeah, it means that nothing in the documents, like if there's any decisions, that they're not approved by council. So for example, the funding, that was mentioned in the sustainability committee minutes, I believe, and as well the purchasing policy. It just means that council didn't approve it.
Okay.
Yes, Rowan?
I move to approve all documents within the sustainability list with the exception of the BDS purchasing guide.
Okay, do we have a second? Arad, is there any opposition to approving everything except the BDS purchasing guide?
No.
Okay, perfect. So that carries unanimously. And at this point, we have a motion to extend by 3 minutes. Do we have a second?
Yeah.
Shad, is there any opposition?
No.
Okay. So there's nothing further on the sustainability point. We're on business arising and Arad with your motion.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat the whereases. Like, these meetings are tense and toxic and long. And we want to incentivize people to come. Be it resolved that students at large speaking time be increased from 2 minutes to 5 minutes. Be it further resolved that when students at large exhaust their 5-minute speaking time, counselors be automatically offered by the chairperson to vote to extend speaking time an additional 5 minutes or at discretion, depending on the severity of the issue at hand.
Is it a second?
Yeah.
Okay. You already kind of motivated. Do you have anything else to say?
I really hope this passes.
Can you omnibus it?
Is there any, yes, Rory?
Yeah, I move to amend, to let students at large speak for a unrestricted period of time with the discretion of the chair, enabling them to be cut.
Point
So
of
instead of giving them 5 minutes and then voting to allow them more, I think we should allow them unlimited and then vote to restrict it if it becomes a problem.
Okay, so there's an amendment on the table. Is there a second?
Yeah.
of the amendment? Chad, so it's to have unlimited speaking time at the discretion of the chair. Yes, Sophie?
Sorry, I really, I'm gonna preface what I'm about to say by saying, I think that students at large absolutely should be incentivized to come to council. It's really important. Thank you so much for your time and for staying through all this meeting. It's been a really rough one, and I really value that. However, there was a meeting in November that went on extraordinarily long, particularly because we gave privileges to students at large over people within the meeting that prohibited us from being able to make decisions, and pushed a lot of things. And as a general coordinator, I faced a lot of heat this year for calling special council meetings to try and make these meetings shorter and more accessible. So I just kind of would like some information from the council, because I agree this has been very toxic, especially as an executive. I mean, someone here didn't have their committee minutes approved, and I don't really know what to say about that, especially since it's a very hardworking executive. And I'm a little confused as this is great. I really want students at large to feel safe here. I don't think the issue is that students at large aren't safe. I'm a little concerned about when students at large do come to these meetings, it's often on hot topic issues where there's a lot of background knowledge needed, and I think this is more an issue of making the CSU more accessible at large than just giving people unlimited speaking time at the discretion of the chair. So I guess my question is so as general coordinator, I've tried to call special council meetings so these meetings aren't so long, and then I faced heat for it. How are we gonna amend that by letting people have unlimited speaking time on hot topic issues when we're already going through this is a 15-point agenda?
That's what you
So who is that question directed to?
I guess just either Rory or Rod, someone who motioned this.
So before.
Yes, do you have a question?
Yeah. So I have sort of a suggestion. Obviously, I can't motion for anything. I don't think anyone needs unlimited speaking time. I think people speak for way too long at one time. But I do think that students at large, that it's important that we hear from them. So is there not a way of allowing them to perhaps move up the speaker list faster so that they can actually get their point across and not have to spend 4 hours waiting for their speaking time, rather than just giving them unlimited time because no one needs to speak forever?
Let's do that.
It's in Robert's rules,
No,
guys.
it's-
Everything that we're talking about is already in Robert's rules. The chair just needs to do it. We're
So
making
do
a big
it, sir.
debate about.
Point of order?
It's there's nothing to be, well, there's nothing about students in Robert's rules, but,
Alright.
So point of order?
yes, Michelle?
No, just
Yeah, can we just make a decision and move on?
Yeah, let's motion to vote and then.
Okay, so currently on the table is an amendment to give unlimited speakers turns, speakers time, sorry, Rowan.
I move, so this is the policy, it's 1 AM and this is turning into nonsense.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table to
sorry,
defer
we're
to a
not getting
committee.
it.
Is there a second?
Yes, here, yeah.
Okay, is there any opposition to deferring the issue to committee?
No.
Okay, so in that case, policy will look at it.
We have lost.
Yes, John?
Wait.
Whoa.
In the meantime, before policy is created, 1:06 a.m., we finally made it here. Here it comes. At Dalhousie, what we would do is a counselor on the speakers list could yield their speaking time to someone in the audience.
Sure, you can probably
That's
do
what
it.
you can do, but that's 2 minutes.
Tell next time.
Are we now in the variables?
Yeah,
Okay,
we're,
I have.
yes, Chad, do you have an announcement?
Yeah, okay, so, quick comment for the position book, there's nothing on LGBTQ plus, so we can add that somehow that'd be fantastic. I looked on it, I'm plastic, LGBT, or something. And then second, okay, because this is our last meeting, right?
I mean, it depends.
Okay, hopefully it is. So if it is, I'll just do this now. Like, it was a pleasure working with y'all. I don't want us to leave like on a negative note, you know, like it was already toxic enough. We all hated each other at one point. I didn't hate anyone, I'm just saying. But like it was good. We need to look at the positives of it. Like we learned a lot. I at least learned a lot from like organizational skills, you know, structure, all this stuff, nonsense, CV stuff. So like it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure working with you. Thank you very much. All the executives, like everyone was hating, but like y'all really worked hard for like pennies. And so like highly appreciative of it. Try to sit as many committees so I can learn as much, and like I really appreciate it. And like y'all should really appreciate it too. So like we should all like say a thank you to the executives, you know. Like, so everyone here, yes. We're all very grateful.
Penny, sorry, I probably.
Yeah, it's fine. I just have a little thing to say, which is not as positive, I'm sorry. I just want to acknowledge the fact how fucked up it is that like we literally had a motion kind of like telling other people that they're not going welcome in this environment, and then like we just change up to just have like normal conversation like nothing happened. So like when you're talking about the CSU not being inclusive and like not really being accessible, that is one thing of just like passing to just like maybe feminism should be one of the position and like we shouldn't have women like around, you know, to like, oh, let's talk about finances. Just saying. Good night.
I love you all.
Don't worry about that. Alright, someone has to actually adjourn the meeting. I will adjourn. Okay, Kevin. Thank you.